Chapter 898. Outer Islands, Mordor City. When the floating space tower returned to Mordor City, it attracted a large number of citizens. As a resident of Mordor City, one must have a strong enough heart and the ability to accept all kinds of new things. The sudden disappearance of the floating space tower attracted the curiosity of many citizens, and when the floating space tower returned, many people came to watch. Recently, the changes in Mordor City were too great. It could be said that it was changing with each passing day. The lighthouse in the port area recently had some airships attached to huge balloons. For the residents of Mordor City, they would not be surprised if the whole city flew into the sky one day. Well, the guide to life in Mordor City had already told them to learn to be used to new things. The Githyanki's inventory was very rich. Gloria and Fallen which needed some time to sort it out, and Soren also needed to conduct a second study of the war chest bit wall, which was a large-scale killing trial. If this thing could be popularized, Soren's current power of faith could increase by about 30%, and if it could be popularized on a larger scale in the future, then Soren's harvest would be very terrifying. It could be said, no god could recover divine power value as fast as Soren. Even after the end of the Avatar crisis, other gods could hardly compare with Soren's speed of accumulating divine power. Even after the end of the Avatar crisis, divine power value would not appear out of thin air. The gods were close to invincible in the kingdom of God because there were thousands of years of accumulation of divine power in the kingdom of God. If Soren succeeded, there would be a steady stream of power to build the kingdom of God in the future, and he could transform the kingdom of God into the ideal kingdom he needed. The second test began 2 days later. Soren changed the mode this time. He no longer competed with the demons and Mordor City, but changed to another map. In a boundless blood-red wilderness. Huge steel fortresses could be seen in the distance, and on the other side was an endless stretch of tents. At first glance, it was a dense crowd of people. No matter who appeared here for the first time, they would feel small and powerless because whether it was the creatures in front of them or the atmosphere of the whole environment, it made people feel a trace of depression and madness. This was the 10,000 Abyss Plains. It was also the first battlefield of the endless bloody war. A team of Mordor City officers appeared on the side of the steel fortress. The leader was a drow instructor, and the others were rangers, lurkers, priests, part-time warriors, and monks. Perhaps it was because his reputation had spread to the eastern countries. Soren also had some monks under his command, and some of them even entered the officer class of Mordor City. Lord Terence. Is this the trial that Sir Soren prepared for us? It doesn't look easy. The first to speak was the lurker. He looked around and muttered, "This place feels weird. It's depressing." A dense fog enveloped the entire battlefield. They could only vaguely see everything in the distance, but they couldn't see clearly what it was. The drow instructor named Terence had a solemn expression on his face. He looked at the steel fortress behind him and murmured, "The scene here seems a little familiar, as if I've seen it in a book. We don't seem to be in the material plane, but have been sent to the lower planes." The ground was blood red. Bones that had existed for a long time could be seen everywhere. It was a huge and cruel battlefield at first glance. They didn't know how long the war lasted for the earth to be blood red. This seems to be the plane of 10,000 Abyss. The one who spoke was the only priest among them. Spellcasters were obviously more knowledgeable. He looked around and said solemnly, "If I'm not wrong, we're now in the 10,000 Abyss plane of the bottomless abyss." Plane of 10,000 Abyss? The first layer of the abyss? Bloody war. Hearing the priest's words, the faces of the others present changed drastically. Then one of them said with a trembling voice, "Endless bloody war? Oh my God. We've been sent to a bloody battlefield?" The priest shook his head and said, "This should be a trial, not a real bloody battlefield. Otherwise, we would have died long ago." As if in response to his words, the fog in the surroundings gradually dissipated. Behind them, a well-equipped army of demons appeared. Countless demons also emerged from the tents in front of them, stretching as far as the eye could see. "Hey! The 5 of you, come with me. At this moment, a burly boned devil appeared in front of them. Facing the 5 of them, he smiled a little disdainfully and said, "I really don't know why the mercenaries sent this time are so weak. The 5 of you together aren't even enough to fill the gap between the teeth of a soul judgment demon. Let's go. Follow me over there. I hope the 5 of you can survive this battle." After he finished speaking, the burly bone demon walked to the other side. The 5 people present seemed to have understood something. They looked at each other and quickly followed him. They were arranged to be bloody war mercenaries in the trial. Moreover, they were arranged to be in the demon camp. The bone devil in front of them was one of the members of the demon army that they joined. So they had already guessed the content of the trial. At the same time, on the other side of the rift plane, a similar scene was happening. However, the people who were teleported here were a little special. Compared to the officers of Motor City, they were more unruly. However, their individual strength was stronger. Because these people were all high-ranking pirates under Soren. Not all pirates were suitable for training into an army. Some pirates could only do their old jobs. And Soren also needed some of these underlings. Damn! There are so many demons. Compared to the officers, the collective quality of the pirates had obviously declined a lot. After the fog dissipated, these pirates were shocked when they saw the demon army nearby. However, the pirates who could survive and reach the top were all very smart and cunning. Under the guidance of a cunning demon, they quickly figured out the whole story and understood that they were now on the side of the demons in the Abyss Bloody War. What they were about to face next was a small-scale skirmish. The left wing of the demon army would launch a surprise attack on the steel fortress of the demon army. And as the Bloody War mercenaries, they would join this surprise attack. As for whether they could survive in the end, it would depend on their luck. P.S. 5 vs 5 Bloody War. The foreshadowing in the war chess plane can finally be filled. Chapter 899. Soren looked down at everything from the sky. As the ruler of the battle flag plane, Soren had created 2 battle flag trials. The difficulty was much easier than the one he encountered at the beginning. He generally used the experience of the battle games in his previous life to set it as a battle mode trial scene. The first one was the battle between Mordor City and the Demon Army, which was used in the first test. This battle flag trials had some limitations, so Soren created today's new trial mode, which was the Endless Abyss Bloody Trial. There was a reason for choosing the Bloody Trial. Because it was something that all professions knew, and it was easy to form a sense of immersion after being sent to the Bloody Trial. The cruel environment would oppress one's own potential. Besides, Soren still needed to do an important test. That was, if the trial was killed by the storyline character, would the killing power be the same as if the trial was killed by the trial? Soren himself had participated in the Abyss Bloody Trial. So the entire battle flag trials was very realistic, and even the terrain was similar to the first layer of the Abyss. This was because Soren simulated all of this based on the bloody battle that his demon avatar had encountered at the beginning. In terms of setting, it was still a small-scale battle because the number of trial participants was still too small. It was not worth Soren spending too much effort to expand the scale of the trial. However, even if it was a small-scale battle, under the scale of the Abyss Bloody Trial, it was enough to easily destroy a small kingdom in a material plane. The number of troops on both sides added up to more than 10,000 people. The identity of the trial participants was unified as mercenaries. There were no racial restrictions to becoming a bloody trial mercenary. Even the demons had become a mercenary on the demon side. With the bloody trial mercenary to strengthen the sense of immersion of the trial participants, Soren needed a real battle to make up for the amount of killing power that the battle flag plane could provide. Battle flag plane, 10,000 Abyss plane. From the initial shock to the current adaptation, Terence had gradually become accustomed to the pressure brought by the demons. As an excellent drow instructor, his own qualities were obviously higher than others. Because of his survival experience in the Underdark, he had also mastered a little way to deal with demons. Now that he had become the leader of a small team of devils, he had some cannon fodder even though his subordinates were all inferior demons. At the same time, on the other side, the trial challengers, who were mainly elite pirates, had encountered some trouble. The reason was that one of the high-grade pirates had cursed at the demon. Demons were creatures. You all know what I mean. As the representative creatures of the chaotic evil alignment, there was never a shortage of hot-tempered demons among the demons. Therefore, this elite pirate was unsurprisingly attacked by a berserk demon. Before the battle began, they had already received an attack from their allies. What was even more speechless was that the demon captain did not have any intention of stopping it. Instead, he watched with interest as the berserk demon attacked them. What kind of bullshit army is this? Old Shark, who was obviously the strongest among the elite pirates, cursed. He then pulled out his weapon and said in a deep voice, "What are you looking at? Are we just going to let him kill the seahorse? Motherf asterisk cur. So what if you're a demon?" The pirates of Mordor were also a group of hot-tempered people. They had followed Sauron through countless battles. Although they were still a little weaker than demons, they were not so weak that they did not even have the courage to fight back when attacked by the other party. A group of pirates surrounded the berserk demon and started to fight. The battle didn't last too long. Even when the berserk demon was killed, the demon captain didn't seem to have any intention of stopping them. After they stopped, the demon captain walked over with a strange smile and said in a deep voice, "Your strength is passable. Although you are not as good as the demon mercenaries, you can still bring a little trouble to the demons. Come. Drag this down and give it to the dretches." Ahezru carried the demon's body with one hand and threw it directly to the dretches behind him. Then the dretches swarmed up. The scene was very bloody. Several elite pirates raised their eyebrows when they saw this. They were all people with blood on their hands, but this kind of scene was still rare. They also had a little more real understanding of the ferocity of demons. "You five. I'll give you a small team of dretches. Your task is to go through the trench from here and snipe the demon's mercenaries." As the captain, the Vrak seemed to be in a good mood. He said in a deep voice, "As long as you can kill the demon's mercenaries, you will have completed the mission." The scene quickly changed. According to the specific trajectory, both sides triggered the core mission of the trial. Although no one triggered the hidden mission, which made Soren a little disappointed, this was also a very normal thing. After all, the trial participants were natives, and it was difficult for them to have the various ideas of the adventurers in his previous life. The next thing was very simple. About 10 minutes later, the devil's mercenaries and the demon's mercenaries encountered each other. The battle broke out. The elite pirates, led by the old shark, were obviously stronger individually, while the officer class, led by the drows, had more organizational ability. The two sides kept fighting back and forth. Although the officers were more experienced, the old pirates were cunning and had some special tactics, so the two sides were evenly matched. When all the demons and devils that served as cannon fodder were exhausted, they had no choice but to join the battle themselves. At this time, Soren couldn't help but focus his attention. Casualties quickly appeared. The first to die was a pirate with a big beard. He died in the hands of the drows, and the moment he died, a very strong killing intent surged out. This killing force was almost twice as strong as the one Soren absorbed last time. It was almost equivalent to a devout believer's prayers for a whole day. There was no doubt about it. When a trial participant died in the hands of demons, the killing force produced was completely different from when they died in the hands of the same trial participant. The difference between the two sides was very obvious. I see. Dying in the hands of other trial participants is the most valuable thing? Soren looked down at everything below and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. The battle continued, and the killing force continued to accumulate. However, just when Soren thought that everything was over, suddenly a very strong killing force emerged, followed by a soul light that directly flew toward Soren's palm. At the same time, on the high platform of the battle flag plain, the 5 elite pirates who seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep suddenly turned pale, and then his breathing became weaker, and finally his heartbeat stopped. He was dead. When he died in the battle flag trial, he also stopped breathing and heartbeat in reality. Chapter 900. This was an accident. Even Soren didn't expect this accident, because according to his evaluation of the battle flag trial, the professions above intermediate and advanced would not die in reality because of death in the trial. But the accident eventually happened. The dead elite pirate had stopped breathing and heartbeat, and Soren also took his soul in his hand. There was a drawback to the battle flag trial. Because it was a real illusion, all those who died in the trial must go through a mandatory test of death when exiting. If their will was not enough, the trial taker may die in reality while dying in the illusion. Obviously, this elite pirate did not pass the test of death. The accident had already happened. Soren had no choice but to send these trial takers out first. As for the aftermath, he already had a plan because he had already thought about what to do if an accident happened. Steel golems appeared one by one. Trial completed. Please leave here with me. The leader of the steel golem spoke to these pirates with a cold mechanical voice. These pirates had just experienced a real death, and they were very tired. Although they found that there seemed to be one person missing, only one of them said, "Where is Swordfish? Why is he missing?" The steel golem said, "He has completed the trial and was sent elsewhere. Now I will escort you out of here." Hearing the words of the steel golem, the other pirates hesitated for a moment, and then left. These pirates were randomly selected, and their relationship with each other was not very good. They didn't know what happened, and even if one person was missing, they didn't care too much. Because the death they had just experienced made them realize a lot. On the other side, the arrangement was much easier. All the officers of Mordor City returned to the barracks. At this time, Soren also came to the body of the dead pirate. There were no wounds on the body, and the expression on the deceased's face was quite frightened. In fact, he was scared to death. With the ability of advanced professions, they could completely bear the side effects of the trial failure, but if they believed that they were really dead at that moment, then the final result would be that their body died in reality. I need to think of a way to deal with this. Soren thought for a moment. He waved his hand and carved a complicated rune on the device connected to the battle flag trial. He murmured, "An enchantment circle that strengthens the will?" The instant the trial taker exits, it will strengthen their immunity. This should reduce the probability of accidents, right? The formation was quickly completed. After completing the enchantment, he couldn't help but stare blankly because this enchantment looked a little familiar. Where have I seen it? Suddenly, Soren seemed to have thought of something. His whole body froze on the spot. After a long time, he let out a sigh and left. News of the battle flag trial did not spread. On the contrary, its benefits were spread among the higher-ups of Mordor City. Because one of the trial takers, Jack, had quickly broken through the original bottleneck after a battle of death, and became a professional very close to the legendary realm in Mordor City. The battle flag trial had a clear effect on the professionals, especially the warriors at the front lines. Facing death was something that every warrior had to experience. In reality, such an experience may not be able to survive in the end. The desperate death provided by the battle flag trial gave the warriors a chance to accumulate anger. The breakthrough between life and death directly allowed Jack to master the ability close to the legendary level. The trial must continue. A little bit of casualties is still bearable, compared with the results brought by the battle flag trial. Soren sat in the study and thought about everything. All the people who had been through the battle flag trial were under his observation. Almost every trial taker would have a period of weakness after completing it, but after the period of weakness, their strength had improved significantly. Almost all the trial takers had a small improvement. In this way, an accidental death of a trial taker was not so important. Soren was not overly kind and compassionate. The second wave of the Avatar crisis could break out at any time, and no one knew how many people would die in the third and fourth waves. In the end, only a few people would survive. It was worth it to take a little risk now in exchange for future survival. Mordor City. The port area. Accompanied by a series of muffled rumbles, a giant airship slowly docked near the harbor's lighthouse. Although the number of airships had reached double digits now, every return would still attract people's attention. This airship had just returned from Arendelle. Relying on advanced alchemy technology, it only took a day and a half for the airship to go back and forth between Arendelle and Mordor City. It flew in a straight line in the sky. Such high efficiency instantly made many people realize the business opportunities in it. Even other chambers of commerce were trying to imitate the structure of the airship. Soren was not surprised by this. As long as he controlled the core technology of the floating ring, he could firmly hold on to the interests in it. The Great Temple. A rogue covered in a cloak hurriedly entered the back of the temple and knelt down on one knee in front of a man who was meditating. "Your Excellency, High Priest. We have found the traces of the Maiden of Pain." She and her believers appeared in Talon City. The nobles of this city have been infiltrated and corrupted by them. Many people in power have been secretly controlled by them. The High Priest raised his head and said slowly, "Have you finally found her?" "I'm telling my lord now. Send people to secretly monitor the movements of their church, but don't miss any important information." The rogue replied, "Yes." The next moment, the High Priest appeared in Soren's study. For the sudden arrival of the High Priest, Soren raised his head in confusion and said, "Is there anything important?" "My lord." The High Priest bowed and said, "We have found the traces of the Maiden of Pain, Lorita. She and her church are hidden in Talon City." "Finally found?" Soren was delighted when he heard this, and then said in a deep voice, "Keep an eye on them. I'm sending people to the continent now. It's time for a hunt." Soren had been looking for the Maiden of Pain for some time. This evil goddess was very cautious. Even though Soren controlled a large number of rogues, he only found important clues now. Soren thought for a moment and said, "Let's not alert the enemy first. I'll personally head to Talon City tomorrow and send someone to deliver the news to the Princess Royal of Arendelle. The Maiden of Pain and the Maiden of Winter are allies. I'm sure she'll be interested in eliminating the enemy's ally." Chapter 901. A quiet night breeze blew through the garden. In a magnificent hall, a strange sound could be heard faintly. It seemed to be a suppressed and painful groan, but it also seemed to be a whisper of joy. In this strange sound, there were also some sharp sounds like slapping. There were 2 heavily armed guards outside the door, but they were obviously a little absent-minded at the moment. Occasionally, they would peek into the hall secretly. When a rather scantily dressed maid came out with a plate, the guards even reached out and touched the maid's buttocks with a smile. The scantily dressed maids were not angry that they were taken advantage of. Instead, they smiled at the guards and then walked quickly to the kitchen. The host and guests inside should be finished soon. They must prepare some snacks and food. After all, it was quite tiring to play with the waiters inside. In the shadows not far away, the ugly monkey silently watched everything in front of him. Next to him was another half-elf. There was a scar on one of his eyebrows, which completely destroyed the half-elf's delicate appearance and added a bit of fierceness. These nobles are quite good at playing. Nothing in the hall could escape their eyes. The half-elf lowered his voice and said, "A high priest, 3 presiding priest attendants, a high-grade knight, and a few others are not up to standard. Shall we do it now?" The ugly monkey glanced at him and whispered, "Wait a little longer. The goddess of abuse, Lorita, is just a god who can't be seen in public. All she does is play with people's hearts. Let's wait until their ceremony is over." Speaking of this, the ugly monkey could not help but curl his lips in disdain. He really looked down on Lorita, the Maiden of Pain, because he had been lurking in Talon City all this time. These believers and priests of the Maiden of Pain played these shameful games all day long, as if they were all masochists. The ceremony inside was about to end. The gorgeous priests were casting magic to heal the wounds of the nobles who were holding the ceremony. Of course, there were also some beautiful girls inside. Some were kneeling under these nobles. As for what they were doing, it was needless to say. As a god that was also active in the Underdark, the Church of the Maiden of Pain had many means to attract these nobles. After a period of observation, Ugly Monkey had figured out the form and method of Lorita's church. Lorita was also an evil god, but she told Ugly Monkey that nothing she did could compare to the Lord he believed in. In conclusion, the way Lorita's church operated was like this: corrupt the nobles, then take them to play the depraved play ritual. Corrupt the merchants, then take them to play the depraved play ritual. Corrupt the civilians, then take them to play the depraved plya ritual. The only difference was the method of corruption and the scale of the various sadistic rituals. Nearly 70% of the nobles in Talon City had been corrupted by the Church of the Maiden of Pain. As an evil god who was good at manipulating people's hearts, Lorita's priests were very good at cultivating the servility of mortals. In addition, there were many beautiful women in the church, so both the abuser and the abused could be satisfied in their hands. Once the soul was corrupted and fell into the abyss of desire, it would not be easy to get out. The whole Talon City was so depraved. From the officials to the civilians, almost all professions had fallen into the control of Lorita's church. They were all evil gods, but sometimes the gap was so big. Unlike what Soren did in Mordor City, Lorita had been immersed in the joy of the priesthood itself. She liked to abuse people, whether it was physically or mentally, and enjoyed the process of others being abused. It was almost time. When the beautiful half-elf priestess pulled back her whip and was about to cast healing spells on the nobles who had just experienced pain and pleasure, the Ugly Monkey and the other half-elf also made their move. Do it. As his cold voice fell, Ugly Monkey's figure disappeared from where he stood. The next moment, he appeared behind the guards in the hall. With a silent flash of cold light, one of the guards died in his hands. The other half-elf also moved quickly, and the two of them cooperated well to kill the two guards at the door. Shadow Jump. After taking over the priesthood of Shadow, Soren's divine power began to give more special abilities to his believers, especially the extension ability in the Shadow Realm, which greatly increased the strength of many rogues under his command. Ugly Monkey's target was the priest. As a spellcaster, when Ugly Monkey sneaked behind her, the fate of Lorita was already decided. No mercy. Ugly Monkey pierced her heart with a dagger without any mercy. At this time, the nobles who had just recovered from the joy and pain let out a scream of horror. There were one or two naked ladies who directly screamed and fainted after seeing the blood spurting out from the priest's chest. The killing did not stop. Ugly Monkey was still harvesting lives. He suddenly felt like laughing when he saw the nobles, who were usually high and mighty, trembling in fear. Without the coat of power, these guys are really disappointing. The whole process was very fast. When Ugly Monkey stopped, the hall was already full of corpses. At this time, the guards outside also reacted, and there were hurried footsteps in the distance. Let's go. Without any hesitation, Ugly Monkey disappeared, and the other half-elf also disappeared quickly. This night, Talon City was very restless. This was because this was not the only place where the attack took place. Tonight, at least 10 places in Talon City had similar assassinations. The targets were almost all the influential people in the city, and almost all of them had priests from the Lorita church present. Soren had already made his move. Before dealing with the Maiden of Pain, the members of the church under his command had already launched an attack on the opposing church. A large number of assassins had cut off Lorita's wings with cold means, and at the same time, they had severely damaged the noble forces that they had corrupted and controlled. This meant that the secular forces of Talon City would be deterred. Those nobles had to weigh their own heads before thinking about whether to get involved in the struggle between the two churches. However, everything had just begun. The Church of Abuse had spent a lot of effort to corrupt the city. Many of the guards and army had been secretly controlled by them. Although Soren's church was stronger, it was not easy for a strong dragon to suppress a snake in its own territory. In order to completely destroy Lorita's power, he had to use a more powerful method. P.S. There is one more update. Chapter 902. Talon City. In a dark temple, a group of scantily clad women gathered near the altar. Madame Deanie. A dark-skinned, gorgeous woman hurriedly walked in from outside the temple and said in a hurry, "Trina is dead. She was attacked by a group of rogues when she was passing through the alley at the bottom of the lake. All the people accompanying her were killed. When we rushed over, only corpses were left on the ground." As soon as her voice fell, the women near the altar were horrified. They then looked at each other and didn't know what to do. Many of these women had dark skin, but most of them were gorgeous. They were not humans, but half-elves of drows and humans. The belief of the Maiden of Pain was also spread in the Underdark. As one of the most feminist gods, she also had a small number of believers in the Underdark. Because all the high-ranking people in the church were women, the same as Lorcy the Spider, a small number of female drows, as well as some mixed-blood drows, were the high-ranking priests in her church. These mixed-blood drows were currently responsible for corrupting Talon City. Have you tracked down the assassins? The woman named Deanie was a charming half-elf, but judging from her skin color, she didn't seem to be a mixed-blood drow. No. The woman who came in shook her head. Deanie couldn't help but show a wry smile when she heard that. She waved her hand and closed the door. Then she looked at the others with a serious expression and said, "Sisters. The situation is very critical now. The true god, Soren, who is in charge of shadows, rogues, half-elves, theft, and tracking, has launched an attack on our church. With the strength of our church, it's difficult to resist. And the god we serve has yet to show up. If this continues, I'm afraid everyone here will die in the hands of those assassins. The enemy has too many rogues and assassins. They are everywhere. Too many of our sisters have left us during this period of time. At this time, we have to make a choice." Hearing the words of the female priest named Deanie, the other women present were puzzled. Some of the smarter women were frightened. "I think some of you have already noticed." Deanie waved her hand gently, and a strange shadow that looked like a blurry human figure appeared in the dark. She said slowly, "The sisters that I've invited this time are all half-elves. Lauvita, whom we once served, can't possibly defeat the powerful Sir Soren. She has already abandoned us. At a time like this, we can only save ourselves. I've already chosen to serve the great Soren. He is the protector of the half-elves. The benevolent him is willing to accept us half-elves. As long as you change your faith and serve him sincerely, you can keep your current status and identity." As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp whistling sound suddenly came from the air, followed by a vicious snake-headed whip lashing at Deanie. At the same time, a furious and sharp female voice rang out, "Damn traitor! How dare you betray the faith of our Lord? Lauvita will not fail. You traitors will all die in torture." There was no shortage of fanatics in any church. Deanie was not surprised by the sudden attack. She also waved her hand and threw out a long whip, then her figure retreated. At this time, the assassins who were lurking in the shadows also moved. Accompanied by cold light, 3 rogues rushed toward the attacking drow at the same time. The next moment, blood splashed, and the fanatic of Lauvita died instantly. The strong smell of blood filled the air. Everyone's mood sank to the bottom because they realized that if they didn't surrender to the Shadow Church today, none of them would be able to leave alive. Deanie was one of the bishop priests in Talon City. Even she betrayed the faith of Lauvita. Could the Church of Torture really defeat the powerful Shadow Church that had the backing of Mordor City and the Outer Islands? I'm willing to serve the great Shadow Lord. Crack. With the sound of a long whip falling to the ground, a beautiful dark-skinned woman put down her weapon. She was a half-blood drow. As a half-elf, it was easier for her to accept the faith of Soren than other gods because Soren was originally a half-elf clergy. Although his core clergy was Shadow, the half-elves were still under his protection. If Soren's church really expressed its willingness to accept them, then they should have a chance to integrate into it. As long as some things were started, the next step would be much easier. Whether they were willing or not, after seeing the corpses lying on the ground, these half-elf priests, who were mainly female, expressed that they could change their faith and serve Soren. Whether they were sincere or not, as long as people first began to surrender to Soren's church, then the situation would move in a direction that was more favorable to the Shadow Church. They were just a group of mortals. And this was a collision between the gods and the church. Although Lauvita had a lot of strength on the surface world, there were still some believers gathered in the Underdark. It was impossible to compete with the Shadow Church only by relying on the church in Talon City. Your Excellency High Priest. After all the half-elf priests gave up resistance, Dini came to a prayer room at the back. She humbly bowed her head to the woman hiding in the shadows in front of her and carefully said, "The half-elf priests in the temple area have basically surrendered. If you agree, I will try my best to persuade the other half-elf priests to give up resistance." The high priest's figure came out. A faint smile appeared on her face as she slowly said, "My lord is merciful. As long as they are willing to surrender to my lord. Then whether they are half-elves or not, they will be forgiven. Lauvita's death is only a matter of time. She has lost her original intention of being a true god. She is addicted to the desire to abuse and be abused. Only by believing in my lord Soren can you be saved. The shadow will protect you." The operation to deal with Lauvita the Whipping Maiden was comprehensive. The assassination in the center was only the surface. The division and subjugation planned by the high priest was the key. As a psionic warlock with a profession level of 30 and above, she could easily find the flaws in the enemy's mind. And these half-elves who served Lauvita were just the beginning. Since he had decided to deal with Lauvita, Soren would not only kill her, but also swallow her whole church. Chapter 903. Inside the dazzling hall. A group of nobles in gorgeous clothes gathered here. The leader was a middle-aged man in his 30s or 40s, with a brown lion emblem on his chest. This was the family emblem of the nobles. The design avoided the symbol of the gods. Generally, this emblem could only be worn by nobles who had an epic character in their family. The middle-aged man in front of him was a member of the lion family. This was an ancient family that had ruled Talon City for more than 100 years. During the era of Queen Isabella, there was an epic character named Golden Lion. The birth of the lion family began at that time, but since then, there had never been an epic character in this family. At most, there would be one or two legendary professions. The lion family had declined for a period of time, but the bloodline of this family still had some advantages. Every few generations, there would always be a few geniuses. And the current leader of the family was the standard genius in the eyes of mortals. At the age of 35, he had entered the realm of legends, the city lord of Talon City, Nox the Lion. Although his strength had entered the realm of legends, and he was already a powerful figure among mortals, at this moment, Nox's expression was quite hesitant and tangled. There were few aristocratic virtues left. This was a dark and foolish era. Everything that Sauron had seen and encountered in Amber City would also appear in Talon City, and it might even be worse than it was in Talon City. The glory of the lion family had been gone for a long time. Although there was a legendary character in these years, there was no doubt that the virtues of the Golden Lion had not been passed on to his descendants. Nox was a noble lord in the lawful evil camp. His cruel rule had always exploited and oppressed the civilians in Talon City. He let the Church of Torture grow stronger in exchange for some gifts from the gods. He even secretly executed several paladins who dared to meddle in other people's business and questioned his rule. If there was no outbreak of the Avatar crisis. With Nox's legendary strength, his rule in Talon City would continue for hundreds of years. However, the outbreak of the Avatar crisis shook his rule, and it also made him need more help from the Maiden of Pain. He thought that with the protection of a god, he would be able to survive this crisis safely. But never had he imagined that he would have an even more terrifying enemy because of this. Shadow Lord, Soren. The mysterious assassins had already turned Talon City upside down. These people were secretly supported by the Thieves' Guild. So far, they had not obtained many clues. City Lord. An old man with a plump face stood up and said, Things can't get any worse. Now, the entire Talon city was in chaos. We have to find a way to stop this. More than 10 nobles have been killed so far. Maybe we should take some revenge on the murderer. This is Sir Finley. He used to be a high-ranking knight, but now he had become a pot-bellied fatty. The fall of Talon city had caused the nobles to indulge in pleasure. More than half of the nobles present were overweight. Even Knox had become much fatter because of the luxurious indulgence. An idiot who doesn't know who the enemy is. Knox thought so in his heart, but he did not say it out loud. Instead, he slowly said, "The situation must be controlled. But more importantly, we must choose a side in this matter." There was no lack of smart people present. The nobles were all a little scheming. And they were proficient in politics, so they naturally knew what the city lord was talking about. "I think we should stand on the side of the goddess of torture. Her church has a closer relationship with us, and Mordor city is far away. They may not win this battle." A nobleman who looked like he had drunk too much said. What he did not say was that the goddess of torture's church had a lot of information on him. If these things were announced, he would be hanged for what he had done. At this time, he had to stand on the side of the goddess of torture, and there was no other choice. "I think the goddess of torture's chances of winning are very low." This time, it was a young noble who spoke. He vaguely looked like a half-elf. There were many half-elves on the continent, and the number of hybrids was not small. In many cities that were ruled by evil, female elves were considered expensive private property. Under such circumstances, it was possible to give birth to a half-elf descendant. This noble was called Telano, and he was the illegitimate son of a half-elf. For an illegitimate son to inherit the title, he must be ruthless enough. Although the other nobles looked at him with a trace of contempt, no one refuted him. This meant that he had the power to deter others. However, although most of the nobles did not speak at this moment, a burly figure sitting on the side sneered, "Telano. You despicable patricide. Are you ready to bow to the enemy so soon?" Patricide. This was a message from Talon city. It was said that Telano inherited the title by poisoning his father with his own hands, but no one could prove this matter. It was only spread among the nobles as a message. Clang. Hearing these harsh words, Telano pulled out his long sword in an instant and said angrily, "Nordente. Shut your stinking mouth, or you'll never be able to speak again." In an instant, the atmosphere became tense. "Enough." As the city lord, Knox shouted and then said, "Today's meeting ends here. Nordente, you stay, the others go back first." In this case, there was no room for discussion. The nobles of Talon city were not united enough. Knox felt that it was better to leave a close noble behind to discuss in secret. Humph. The half-elf illegitimate son named Telano glared at the burly man in the dark and left with his entourage. He had been adventuring on the continent in his early years and had a group of decent outlaws by his side. Even Knox didn't want to make things too awkward with him. The group of nobles retreated. However, some of them did not leave the city lord's mansion but went directly to the backyard. These were Knox's trusted aides. The Shadow Church came aggressively. Most of the nobles of Talon city had a close relationship with Lorita's church. At this time, they were obviously more familiar with Lorita than the Shadow Church that they had never met. The night sky was dark. The nobles who stayed did not leave until very late because they could not think of a better solution. Knox rubbed his forehead tiredly. He felt that the situation was very tricky because as a secular noble, it was very uncomfortable to be involved in the struggle between two god churches. Not good. Not good. A panicked voice came. Knox stood up and said angrily, "Why are you panicking?" A man dressed as an official staggered in and then said in a panic, "City Lord." Not good. Telano rebelled. He has led people to attack the warehouse. He is now attacking the city defense. Many guards have been bribed by him to rebel. Rebel? In an instant, Knox woke up with a start. Recalling Telano's resentful eyes when he left, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart and said in a deep voice, "How many people do they have? Immediately gather the other nobles and follow me." The man dressed as an official stammered, "Many. Many troops. Telano found many reinforcements from God knows where. These rebel troops are all flying a black flag." Ignoring the stammering official, Knox immediately rushed out with the others. As soon as they went out, they saw the flames in the distance. Many places in Talon City were on fire, and they could vaguely hear mournful cries. Further away, there was the sound of troops gathering, and some dull loud noises. They did not know what was going on. "City Lord, don't worry." The burly noble named Nordente frowned and looked at the flames, then said, "With Telano's strength, even if there are reinforcements, there can't be many of them. I think he is trying to confuse us. Let me bring people to catch him and bring him to you." Chapter 904. The entire Talon city fell into chaos. Ordinary people locked their doors and windows and looked at the army gathering outside in horror. Fortunately, Trano's men were disciplined, and no one took the opportunity to rob civilians. Rumble. The dull sound of artillery fire came, and this loud noise made Knox's heart skip a beat. He said angrily, "Why is there the sound of artillery? Did Trano capture the armory as well?" "No." A man stammered, "He should have found a way to get it from outside." The guards from the city lord quickly gathered, and then they encountered Trano's men on the street. Knox couldn't help but curl his lips because the army in front of him was obviously a motley crew of adventurers and mercenaries. Compared to the personal guards of the Lion family, these people were obviously not enough. The fact was as he guessed. These Trano's men were almost defeated at the first touch. They could only fight with the corrupt city guards, but they were no match for the private guards of the nobles. But just when Knox thought he could quell the rebellion quickly, an army with a black flag appeared in front of him. At the moment when he saw this army, Knox's heart couldn't help but sink. He had been on the battlefield. He had seen a real army, and the team that was advancing silently in front of him was undoubtedly that kind of real army. Black flag? The flag of Mordor City. As if thinking of something, Knox's expression suddenly became very scary. Reality soon gave him a response. Because at this moment in Mordor City, in the laboratory near the arcane tower, a cold mechanical voice had just sounded, "Space Waymark Lock. Target Talon City. Open the number 1 temporary portal. Release the steel golems. Space Waymark Lock. Target Talon City. Open the number 2 temporary portal. Release the 3rd guard of Mordor City." Several mechanical voices sounded in succession. With the white teleportation aura, an army suddenly appeared in Talon City thousands of miles away. At this moment, 5 heavy steel golems appeared in front of Knox. Damn it! Knox felt that the situation was out of his control, but he had no other choice. He roared, drew his weapon, and rushed toward the army in front of him. Now he only hoped that the goddess of abuse, Lorita, could appear as soon as possible because the decayed guards of Talon City could not stop the attack of the elites of Mordor City. First Street has been conquered. The south gate of Talon City has been occupied. The central square has been occupied. The 3rd squad is attacking the Ordnance Division. The 5th guard is attacking the city lord's mansion. The continuous mechanical sound echoed, and the army of Mordor City was like a sophisticated instrument, easily destroying the defense line of Talon City, and then steadily advancing, gradually encroaching on the enemy's territory. At this moment, Soren was also quietly observing everything. This was the first time that Mordor City had used the portal for a long-range siege. Although they had secretly provoked a rebellion of a noble, when it came to actual command, many elements were still far beyond the military standards of this era. Fortunately, under the command of Thaling, the army of Mordor City had been steadily advancing. Defeat the city guards. Taking over the defense. The captives have all been escorted. The 3rd Street has been strongly resisted. A large number of enemy knights have appeared, requesting support from the rear. As a big city, Talon City naturally had a group of old noble forces. Their family had trained many knights, which was the biggest problem for Soren to take over Talon City. He thought for a moment and said, "Release the diamond golems. Giants will lead my guards to join the battlefield." The plan would always change. At first, Soren wanted to kill Lorita, but then he found that the Church of the Goddess of Torture seemed to be able to take over Talon City. Then he found that Talon City seemed to be decaying. As long as he sent a regular army, it was possible to take down the city. In the end, everything happened in front of him. Because of the stubbornness of the nobles of Talon City, Soren's plan to deal with the nobles of Talon City directly turned into a plan to wipe them out. The giants, who had been waiting for a long time, were already hungry and thirsty. After the portal opened, they immediately led the guards into it. Whoosh! Muffled footsteps sounded, followed by the screams of the guards who were sent flying. Nox raised his head and found that a burly giant had appeared in front of him. The mud giant. When he was young, he had adventured on the road, so he knew very well how terrifying the power of such a creature with such an amazing physique could be. The giant also noticed Nox. He was not very smart, but he was not stupid. He immediately recognized that the nobles in front of him were different. They seemed to be from the ruling class of Talon City. Thus, he smirked and swung the heavy anchor at Nox. The terrifying power set off a gust of wind, and Nox did not dare to face it head-on. He dodged awkwardly. Behind him, a thick wall collapsed under the giant's attack. Monster. Nox was nervous. Only a non-human creature could unleash such a terrifying power. Even a legendary warrior would not be able to resist it. The giant's attack seemed slow, but the heavy and huge anchor made up for many problems. Nox found that the enemy's attack range was too wide. Although he could seize the opportunity to sneak attack, it also meant that the enemy's next attack would leave him with no way to escape. Nox did not know if he was strong enough to withstand the giant's terrifying power. He wanted to retreat. As the Lord of Talon City, his life was very valuable. So many years of comfortable life had already worn away his ambition. He did not want to risk his life to fight a worthless giant. However, at this moment, a cold voice sounded, "Giant. Why are you dawdling for so long? We must take Talon City in 3 hours. Don't waste time." Ugly Monkey's figure appeared from the shadows, and then another soft female voice sounded. She said in surprise, "He is the Lord of Talon City, Nox. Once we kill him, Talon City will be ours." The priestess of the Church of Torment appeared behind them. Ugly Monkey's eyes lit up when he heard this. He instantly pulled out his dagger and rushed forward, murmuring, "The Lord of Talon City? Looks like an opponent worth fighting." Panting. Heavy panting. Nox felt that his physical strength was about to be exhausted. As a legendary warrior, although he had great strength, more than 10 years of comfortable aristocratic life had made him unable to break through for a long time. His legs were stabbed 3 times, and 2 of his ribs were broken by the huge force in his chest. He knew that he was about to die. The battle in Talon City was about to stop. He could still stand now because of the pride of the Lion family and the legendary profession. Seeing Trano's figure in front of him, Nox's eyes suddenly turned red, and he said angrily, "You shameless traitor." "Traitor?" Trano smiled, then bowed respectfully to a woman in the shadows, and said, "This is called adapting to circumstances. What does Lauvita have that is worth us fighting for her? Don't think that I don't know why you don't want to surrender. I know all about the despicable things you did with the Church of Torment. TSK. Trano walked over slowly with a hint of madness on his face. "Don't think that you can control Talon City by killing me. You are just a puppet of Mordor City." Nox said angrily. Trano didn't care about it at all and said slowly, "So what? At least I control Talon City in name, and I have more power and wealth. Mortals should know how to be content." Mordor City was far away. Even if he controlled Talon City secretly, there must be a puppet standing on the surface. This puppet didn't need to be a puppet because Soren didn't have so much energy to manage Talon City. Trano could enter Soren's sight because he was a half-elf, and because he was a ruthless guy who could help Soren deal with a lot of shady things. Soren didn't care about the constraints of morality. As a god of the evil alignment, he only cared about the benefits that he could obtain. Boom! A loud noise came from the distance, and it came from the temple area. This time, the chaos didn't affect the temples of other gods. The only one that was attacked was Levita's temple. At this moment, a dazzling light appeared on Levita's temple. The figure of a goddess could be vaguely seen. Nox suddenly laughed and said crazily, "Lauvita has arrived. You guys are all going to die." "Is that so?" Trano smiled. Then, he slowly said, "My lord has been waiting for him for a long time." My lord? Trano already believed in the half-elf god? Almost at the same time, just as the dazzling light appeared above Levita's temple, a golden figure also appeared above the great temple of Mordor City. Then, Soren, who was in the form of a saint, appeared above Talon City. "I finally forced you out." He stared coldly at Lauvita in front of him. She was a beautiful woman with a cold face, holding a nine-tailed whip in her hand. At this moment, she was facing Soren's gaze. She had no choice because if she didn't appear, Levita's faith in the surface world would collapse, and the church was so badly damaged that the gods didn't dare to come out to fight. The faith in the Underdark would be easily taken away by other gods. The Queen of Spiders had been waiting for this for a long time. If Lauvita didn't even have the courage to fight Soren, then Lolth would be very willing to completely erase her influence in the Underdark. At that time, perhaps Lauvita could only wait for her death. P.S. I owe a lot of manuscripts, but fortunately, I've already paid them back. Chapter 905. The Avatar Crisis did not require mercy. When Levita's figure appeared, Soren immediately transformed into his saint form and greeted her. This time, the battle was completely different from the past. The moment the two sides clashed, there was almost no close-range combat. The reason was simple. The Avatar Crisis had been going on for some time. Soren had accumulated a lot of divine power, and Lauvita had also accumulated a lot of divine power. As long as the divine power was not depleted, the divine shield of a god could resist almost any magic damage and physical damage. For gods like the Queen of Spiders, even the super-arcane crystal pulse cannon could be resisted by the divine shield. Soren did not encounter an enemy with enough divine power when he killed Malor, the god of the hunt, and the Lord of Shadows, but when he fought against Lauvita, he encountered an enemy who had at least 30% of her divine power. Rumble. A dazzling golden light erupted over Talon City. This was a battle that was very close to the true god form. Lauvita cast at least 3 level 9 divine spells in a row the moment Soren appeared, and Soren also used his divine power to offset the opponent's attack. Under their feet was the temple district of Talon City. It was just the beginning of the battle, but the aftermath of the divine power had already destroyed the land. The only thing that was intact were the temples that were shrouded in light. A little civilian casualties were inevitable, but at this time, no one cared about it. When the Avatar Crisis broke out, mortals were like ants. In the past 2 years, almost hundreds of millions of innocent creatures died tragically. Soren had long been mentally prepared for some things. The battle of divine power continued. Soren's divine power was not far from Levita's, which meant that after both sides exhausted their divine power, they would not be able to cast divine spells in their saint form. Next, it was time to test their true strength. The strength of a god was not only determined by their own divinity level and divine power, but also the most basic profession level and comprehensive strength. During the Avatar Crisis, no god could squander their divine power points without limit. After fighting against more than 10 level 9 divine spells, their divine power points were running low. Soren stopped casting divine spells, while Lauvita activated her divine shield. They could only use the remaining divine power points to defend themselves. Any extravagant actions could cause both sides to be unable to defend against a single fatal attack. At this moment, Soren finally saw Lavita's appearance. A very beautiful and cold young woman. This should be Lavita's original form, a cruel and merciless beautiful woman. She was like a flower with poisonous thorns, not minding taking the lives of others. Shadow Lord, Soren. Lavita's voice was unusually calm as she said calmly, I don't have any grudges with you. I don't understand why you're targeting me. Soren looked at him quietly and said slowly, Is that so? In this calamity, we have no choice. You are blocking my path forward. That's all. Lavita fell into silence. In fact, her question just now had no meaning, because an evil god almost didn't need any legitimate reason to deal with someone, as long as there were enough benefits. She was like this. Soren was like this too. Almost all evil gods were like this. Lavita didn't speak again, but waved her nine-tailed whip and rushed up in an instant. She was not a spellcaster. Lavita, who was in charge of pain and torture, was a very good fighting god, so even if she faced Soren head-on, she didn't feel afraid. Shadow, realm. Tracking, realm. Crafty, realm. The power of realms was spread out, and the role of the gods' accumulation of priesthoods and realms was reflected in this level of battle. The more powerful the realms and priesthoods that any god had, the more obvious the advantage in this kind of battle. Soren's priesthoods and realms instantly suppressed Lavita's power, directly forming a suppression on immunity. Epic divine power. Soren's figure was accompanied by a silver-white stream of light, and he could sneak around freely within the range of the shadow realm. Lavita's priesthood strengthened the pain that Soren suffered, but it was nothing to his will. With the power of an intermediate god against a lesser god, it was already suppressing. As long as the battle continued like this, Soren's victory was only a matter of time. However, any victory would not come so easily. Just when Soren was suppressing Lavita to the point where she could not raise her head, a rotten smell suddenly filled the night, and then the army from Mordor City had a dark face. Some people with weaker physiques almost died instantly. Be careful. These gases are poisonous. Priest. Hurry up and disperse these poisonous gases. Everyone gather around the priest. Panicked voices sounded. These highly poisonous gases appeared in Talon City without anyone knowing. Not only the army of Mordor City, but also many residents died from the poison. It was a bit like the cloud of death, which had a fatal effect on low-level creatures, but the range was many times larger than that of the cloud of death. Haha. Soren, the Lord of Shadows. Do you think I will deal with you alone? My reinforcements are here. Lavita suddenly teleported away, and a smile appeared on her face. In just a short time, hundreds of people died in the army of Mordor City, almost all of them died from the poisonous gases. At the same time, some figures of Droll appeared in Talon City. The Witherers. The Droll represented the fall and corruption, the evil believers who served the Lady of Poison. These Witherers summoned rotten vines and plants, and appeared in the dark to attack the army of Mordor City. There were also traces of lizard men. The Lady of Poison, Talona. Soren's figure stopped in midair. He looked into the darkness, where there was a rotten and gloomy divine breath. He said with a blank expression, It seems that I guessed right. But do you think you can defeat me like this? The Lady of Poison, the Lady of Disease, the Mother of all plagues, Talona had many titles that made mortals afraid. She was often described as a haggard old woman with various religious tattoos on her face. Wherever she went, misfortune and suffering would inevitably follow. Her heart was like that of a headstrong and greedy child, but trapped in a shell that had once been beautiful but was now ravaged by disease and age. A poor god who had been corrupted by her clergy. This was why Soren had always paid attention to his own will. Talona was a typical god who had been controlled by her clergy. Even her body had been corrupted by the clergy of poison and disease. Talona used to serve the god of slaughter, Baal, together with Lavita. Soren's calmness made Lavita feel a little uneasy. Two weak gods could kill Soren, but Soren's calmness at this moment meant that he didn't care. A gust of cold wind appeared. Without any warning, the temperature of the entire Talon city began to drop gradually. It was already the 4th or 5th month of the year, but Talon city, which was located in the south, seemed to have entered the cold winter season all of a sudden. A gust of wind with snow and ice raged, blowing away all the poison and gas. Amidst the dancing snow and ice, the figure of the Princess Royal slowly appeared in Talon city. She had been here for a long time. It was just that Soren didn't signal her to do it, so Princess Royal didn't show up. When the plot of the Lady of Poison emerged, the time for Princess Royal to show up had also arrived. The cold wind blew away the haze of death, and the ice and snow turned the witherers into crystal ice sculptures. Arendelle's Queen of Ice, Lavita's face suddenly changed. The goddess of torture paid a big price to persuade Talona to help her, but the appearance of Princess Royal directly destroyed her plot because she was a mortal comparable to a god. Arendelle's Queen of Ice, a mortal who inherited the power of the goddess of the north wind and snow, almost all gods knew that she was a very difficult enemy to deal with. 2 against 2. In this case, her chances of winning were not very high. Soren's expression was very calm. It was not the first time he killed a god, and he knew very well that he couldn't make any mistakes when dealing with any god. It was best to go all out. It seems that you don't have a backup plan. Soren looked at Lauvita in front of him and said slowly, "Then it's my turn." Dimensional lock. A force sealed the surrounding space, and at the same time, accompanied by the light of teleportation, Gloria, Fallen Witch, Vivian, and the High Priest all appeared in the sky above Talon City. This was an important actual combat, and blindly protecting them was not enough. Soren also wanted to let them try to deal with a god-level enemy, so that they could understand how powerful a true god was. A huge portal appeared. With a strange silver-white halo, the whole Talon city was shrouded in the magic lock of the arcane tower. This was the second generation of magic lock, which integrated the characteristics of the astral sand into the magic lock. A dark and broken warship appeared under the night sky. The ghost ship, Deadman's Voice, appeared silently and immediately headed towards the believers of the goddess of poison. The corrupted witherers continued to bombard them, but there were still a lot of enemies. The believers of the goddess of poison greatly made up for the enemy's strength. However, the balance of the battle was still tilting towards Soren's side, because with the magic lock of the arcane tower covering the whole Talon city, the power of the field had been added to the army of Motor City. The magic lock's protective field. This was Soren's trump card to deal with the Blood War Legion, and today was the first large-scale practical test of the magic lock's field. Chapter 906. The goddess of poison and the goddess of torture once served the god of slaughter, Baal. Soren knew from the beginning that dealing with Lorita would not be as simple as dealing with the god of the hunt, Malor. It might even be more troublesome than dealing with the god of shadows. Because according to Soren's worst-case scenario, when dealing with the goddess of torture, Lorita, it was possible that the Lady of Night, Shar, would come out. Lorita once served the Lady of Night, but with the resurrection of the god of tyranny, Ban, she returned to the command of the 3 gods of death and became Ban's subordinate. Later, Ban died under the conspiracy of Cyric. The goddess of torture once followed the Dread Lord, but later she wavered between the Dread Lord and the Lady of Night. The battle on the ground became more and more intense. It could be seen that this time Lorita, the goddess of torture, was desperate because the army of Mordor had encountered the Drows from the Underdark, which meant that Lorita had even sent out the believers of the Underdark. The goddess of poison did not put in all her power, but there were also a lot of witherers and fallen droll in Talon City. They were good at using disease spells, and almost all the weapons of the believers were smeared with poison, which put a lot of pressure on the army of Mordor, especially the priests, who could only cast healing and detoxification spells with all their strength. "Leave this to me." Gloria's figure floated in the air, and 72 tarot cards kept flying around her. As a legendary witch with the full support of Mordor, her equipment and strength were even stronger than high-grade legendary wizards. At this moment, Gloria was the main force against the Witherers, and the Fallen Witch was casting slightly forbidden spells to eliminate the droll who served the Lady of Poison. Because the goddess of poison was in charge of poisons, she also had a group of assassin followers under her command. The rogues from Sauron were fighting with the other side, but at the moment, they did not have much of an advantage. The rogues who believed in Sauron had more powerful shadow abilities and stealth abilities, and almost all the assassins who served the Lady of Poison were good at using deadly poison. In contrast, at this moment, the casualties in Mordor City were greater. The scope of the battle between the gods was very large, and there were not many intact parts of the temple area. Princess Royal was fighting against Lady of Poison at first, but after a few minutes, she appeared beside Sauron and said, "Change. Leave this to me." Sauron didn't know why at first, but when he saw that Princess Royal's face was a little pale, he didn't think too much about it. He immediately changed his target to the Lady of Poison and handed the goddess of torture, Lorita, to Princess Royal. The Lady of Poison was a deity with an ugly and ferocious appearance because her divine title had corrupted her body. After approaching the Lady of Poison, Sauron knew why Princess Royal wanted to change her opponent. A malicious and decaying domain power enveloped him. As Sauron approached the Lady of Venom, a row of data popped up in front of his eyes. Affected by poison, domain. Triggered a mandatory immunity test. Constitution immunity test passed. Will immunity test passed. Within the range of the poison domain, you will receive 3 poison corrosion damage per second. Affected by disease, domain. Activated a mandatory immunity test. Constitution immunity test passed. Will immunity test passed. Within the range of the disease domain, you will receive 3 poison corrosion damage per second. Sauron almost passed all the mandatory immunity tests. But the problem was that even so, after he got close enough to the Lady of Poison, he would constantly receive damage from the other party's divine title domain. It was almost ignored and immune to nearly 6 negative damage per second. No wonder almost no adventurers wanted to kill her during the Avatar crisis. And this was because Sauron passed the other party's immunity test. If he didn't pass, the damage of the divine title domain that the Lady of Poison could create would be even more amazing. There was no doubt about it. Princess Royal's immunity was not very high. As a female spellcaster, Princess Royal's immunity tests were much worse than Sauron's. This was also the reason why she asked for a change of opponent. As a warlock with relatively low HP, if this battle dragged on for too long, she might be killed by the Lady of Poison. But for Sauron, it was much easier because not only was his resistance high enough, but he also had a very strong burst ability. The Lady of Poison's domain was not very difficult for him to deal with. Talona's once beautiful body had been corrupted by her divine title. Her face looked like it was infected with leprosy, and there were strange abscesses and swollen lumps on her body. This was rarely seen on other gods, and the meaning it represented was naturally extraordinary. First of all, Talona could not control her divine title at all. The power of these 2 divine titles had suppressed her body, turning a god's body into this appearance. Secondly, the divine domain of poison and disease was much stronger than what they had shown. It was definitely not just a divine domain of lesser divine powers. It might even be a divine domain of intermediate divine powers or greater divine powers. It was precisely because of this that Talona's body was corroded by the divine domain. The divine title of poison was a little better. But according to Sauron's judgment, the divine title of disease should not be a low-level divine title. It was very likely to be a mid-level divine title or above. This was because diseases contained too many things. There was once a mid-level divine title or above that of the goddess of pestilence. In order to replenish her divine power, Talona had once released a plague. This allowed her to gain more hatred from the goddess of agriculture, but it also allowed her to recover a lot of power. Facing Sauron in front of her, the Lady of Poison was not afraid because in her view, Sauron would never be able to get rid of the brand of a new god. Even if the divine title was lower than Sauron's, Talona believed that she had a high chance of winning. Buzz. After the first tentative fight, the ferocious Lady of Poison in front of him suddenly opened her mouth and spat out a strange insect. The ground under her feet was quickly contaminated and turned into a land full of poison. All the plants around her quickly withered and died. This was the power of her divine title. The diseases that Talona was in charge of not only included intelligent life, but also all animals and plants. It was because of this that the goddess of earth and the goddess of agriculture hated her very much. The dark green poison quickly spread. Even the stones under her feet were quickly corroded, and the strange insects spat out by the Lady of Poison turned into a black cloud and quickly rushed towards Soren, completely enveloping him from all directions. An inexplicable sense of crisis. Soren felt a strong sense of danger from these strange insects, and his divine sixth sense made him realize that these insects could even kill him. Chapter 907. The sixth sense was a very powerful ability. It could give the user an amazing intuition of danger, and when the crisis of death was approaching, the user would also have a strong sense of danger. Poisonous insects were everywhere. They didn't know what kind of strange things they were, but they seemed to be a kind of magical creature. Spells and flames couldn't kill them all at once. The sense of crisis was getting closer and closer because these insects were too small and there were too many of them. Soren had no place to dodge at all. "Brother, be careful." There was only one person on the battlefield who had a strong sixth sense, and that was Vivian. The little girl was keenly aware of the danger and directly teleported closer and cast a legendary spell. Time stop. The flying insects suddenly stopped in midair. Although they were magical creatures of the gods, there was no way for them to be immune to the effect of time stop. Good chance. Soren realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Vivian's temporary help gave Soren a chance to attack. The goddess of poison, Talona, was a god who did not use weapons. Her full name was the Goddess of Poison and Disease. Her weapon was the rough hand, which was the legendary bare-handed attack. Because she was in charge of diseases and poisons, Talona's hands could automatically trigger various diseases and toxins when they came into contact with the enemy. This ability was very fatal to mortals. With the power of her realm, even thousands of professions could not necessarily kill her. However, for Soren, who had amazing resistance, once he closed the distance and attacked Talona with her bare hands, she would be a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. Shadow Strike. Simulacrum. Soren's sudden attack seemed to be a signal. In an instant, the situation of the whole battlefield was reversed. His figure split into two when he jumped. Two Saurons that looked exactly the same appeared in front of the goddess of poison. They attacked from the left and right respectively, brandishing their silver-white scimitars. At the same time, the power of the Shadow Realm covered the area, the breath of death spread, and the power of slaughter temporarily suppressed the Poison Realm. Soren was ready to rush to the opponent's side for close combat. On the other side of the battlefield, the Blighters who served the goddess of poison and the followers of the goddess of torment both suffered a devastating blow. This was because when Soren cast the mimicry spell, Gloria also split into two under the night sky, and the spell bombarded the Blighters like cannon fire. But this was only the beginning. Fallen Witch Kalina, who was obviously absent-minded and seemed to be slacking, also became serious. She also cast Simulacrum. The two black-robed Fallen Witch acted separately, and countless spells fell like a torrent. The easiest one was probably Vivian. The little girl's magic attack was already overwhelming, and because Lillian was in her body, she was even more effective than Soren when she cast Simulacrum. She was the only one who could fully display the power of Simulacrum among everyone present. Two figures of Vivian appeared on the battlefield. The original was controlled by Vivian herself, while the avatar was controlled by Lillian's consciousness. The first round of attacks was thousands of arcane missiles. The arcane missiles formed a torrent, and completely enveloped the followers of the goddess of torment. At this moment, the whole battlefield changed, and even Princess Royal was slightly surprised. She opened her mouth and murmured, "What kind of spell is this?" Simulacrum. One of the core spells that was lost during the Arcane Empire. Splat. Rotten and poisonous blood splattered. Soren brandished his scimitar and sliced off the rotten flesh on his arm. Then, he converted his divine power and cast restoration on himself. In front of him was the goddess of poison, Talona, who was covered in wounds. Many of the pustules on her body had ruptured, and the blood of the deity had been corrupted by her divine domain, turning into a horribly corrosive liquid. Everything that came into contact with her blood would be stained with poison and decay. The outcome of the battle was obvious. Soren disappeared on the spot and appeared behind the goddess of poison. Along with a strange silver-whitish stream of light, he swung his scimitar and decapitated her. Thud. The headless corpse fell to the ground. Along with Talona's death, a dazzling divine radiance spread. A large part of it poured into Soren's body, while the rest spread to the others on the battlefield. A divine radiance entered Gloria's body. A divine radiance entered Vivian's body. A divine radiance entered Princess Royal's body. What surprised Soren was that at the moment of the goddess of poison's death, a divine radiance that represented the power of her divine domain flew directly to the nearby fallen witch. Then, the fallen witch's body trembled as the radiance merged with her body. There were more than 10 divine radiances scattered when the goddess of poison died. Apart from the majority that Soren obtained, even the ugly monkey obtained 1 divine radiance during the battle. At the same time, among the withered in the enemy camp, there were also some who obtained the power of the goddess of poison. A row of data appeared in front of his eyes. You have killed the goddess of poison, Talona. Extracting target's soul energy. You have received 63 million slaughter EXP. Target possesses divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You have received 45 divine radiance. Target possesses divine radiance. Extracting target's divine radiance. You have received 25 divine radiance. Divine domain conflict. You are unable to master the disease, divine domain. You have received partial information about the disease, divine domain. You have mastered the disease, divine domain. Would you like to convert the disease, divine domain into the death, divine domain? Divine domain conflict. You are unable to master the poison, divine domain. You have received partial information about the poison, divine domain. You have mastered the poison, divine domain. Would you like to integrate the poison, divine domain into the rogue, divine domain? There were no surprises. Soren was not very compatible with the divine domain of the goddess of poison, Talona. The only thing that could be connected was that diseases brought death, and rogues were good at poison. These 2 divine domains were not compatible with Soren's divine domain, so he could only master 1 step backward. This was also why Talona's power was scattered to many people. P.S. There is another update today. Chapter 908. There was a degree of compatibility between the powers absorbed by the gods. Soren could completely absorb some of the power of the clergy, while he could only absorb a small part of some of the power of the clergy. He could only master the most basic domain ability. What happened just now was very surprising. A large part of the power of the clergy that Soren did not absorb was directly absorbed by fallen witch Corinne. At the same time, the power of divinity and divinity from the goddess of poison, Talona, was also integrated into her body. According to Soren's current observation in the holy form, the power of divinity that fallen witch absorbed without her realizing it was enough for her to advance all the way to the demigod form. Why did this happen? Soren himself was not very clear, and he was not sure whether the fallen witch was compatible with the clergy of disease or poison. The Avatar crisis was a disaster. There was no doubt about this, but the Avatar crisis was also a period full of infinite possibilities, because in this period, there were indeed many mortals who became gods. There were always some lucky ones who were compatible with the power of the gods, and there were even mortals who were directly hit by the shards of divinity that fell from the sky. There was no doubt. The fallen witch was now one of those lucky ones. The death of the goddess of poison directly led to the collapse of the Witherers, and the goddess of torture, who was fighting alone, seemed to be completely unable to hold on. Soren killed Talona, so if he joined forces with the Princess Royal, Lauvita would not be able to hold on for a while. Therefore, The goddess of the lawful evil alignment simply distanced herself, and then knelt on one knee towards Soren in front of the Princess Royal's surprised face, and said loudly, "Great Shadow Lord. I am willing to serve you as my master. I once served the god of slaughter, Baal. You have the power of his bloodline in you. Please accept my allegiance. I am willing to give you everything I have." It was a completely unexpected situation. Even Soren didn't expect this to happen. He didn't expect Lauvita to surrender so easily after her ally died. As expected of a god of the lawful evil faction. Seeing that the situation was not right, he knelt down without hesitation. The goddess of torture, Laurita, instantly surrendered and wanted to serve Soren as her master. The Princess Royal naturally stopped her attack and waited to see how Soren would deal with the situation. Facing this situation, Soren was also a little surprised. However, he quickly calmed down and said, "I'm afraid it's not just because you serve the god of slaughter, Baal, right? You have served the god of tyranny, Bane, the Lady of the Night, Shar, and the Dread Lord. You actually serve such a god? Then how should I trust your loyalty?" Hearing Soren's words, the goddess of torture, Laurita's expression suddenly stiffened. As one of the dark gods, she had indeed served many gods, but she was a standard believer of power and benefits. When the god of slaughter fell, she betrayed him without hesitation. When the god of tyranny failed, she betrayed him without hesitation. His past experience determined that Soren couldn't trust this evil goddess. I can make a Styx oath." The goddess of torture, Laurita, thought for a moment and gritted her teeth. "In the name of the true god, in the name of the soul, swear." Soren didn't feel the slightest joy when he heard this. Instead, he frowned and said, "That's not enough. I need your soul imprint. If you can do it, I'm willing to accept your allegiance." Soul imprint. This was even more ruthless than the Styx oath. The former was just a great price to pay, but the latter meant that Laurita would become Soren's personal slave. Sure enough, Laurita refused without hesitation. However, when the princess saw her refusal, she immediately attacked again. This time, the goddess of torture finally panicked a little. It seemed that Soren didn't intend to accept her allegiance at all. If she didn't hand over the soul imprint now, she was afraid that she would really die here today. Should she fight to the death? Or should she just drag out an ignoble existence? Without much time to think, the goddess of torture, Laurita, quickly made a decision and said, "Great Lord of Shadows. If I hand over the soul imprint, can you guarantee my status and power?" As expected of a god of the evil faction. At this time, she was still thinking about her status and power in the future. Soren quickly gave an answer and said in a deep voice, "I will give you the status of a god, and I won't deprive you of any power. But you must be completely loyal to me. Otherwise, I will give you a very serious punishment. In the name of the Styx." As gods of the evil faction, Soren and Laurita's oaths carried weight. The goddess of torture hesitated for a while, then said, "Okay. I'm willing to use the soul imprint in exchange for your trust." A golden light of divinity appeared. Soren's face finally showed a smile, and he directly took back the golden light in his hand. After confirming that there was no problem, he injected his god's soul imprint into it. From now on, the goddess of torture was equivalent to his personal servant, and her life was completely in his hands. However, she was still a true god, and Soren still had to give her enough respect. At the very least, he had to maintain the status of a god. It was always easier to deal with evil gods than with good gods of the evil faction. Once the soul imprint was completed, the goddess of torture quickly adapted to her new identity. She directly ordered all her believers to give up resistance, and at the same time, told them that she had become a god of the Shadow Lord. Everything was so dramatic. The enemies who were fighting to the death in the beginning suddenly became allies. As the goddess of torture served Soren as her master, her church naturally became a subordinate church under Soren's command. From now on, Laurita's identity was Soren's god, and her church had to listen to Soren's control and orders. In any case, the final result was very good. The believers who thought that they were doomed to die quickly accepted their new identity. Since the goddess of torture was shameless enough to surrender and become a god of the Shadow Lord, then why should they care about the mortals? Surrendering to a strong god was not a shameful thing. The surrender of the goddess of torture, Lorita, made Soren's harvest a little more than he expected. It meant that he would have a lesser god at his disposal in the future, but it also meant that Vivian's priesthood was temporarily unavailable. He was afraid that he would have to think of other ways to find a suitable priesthood for the little girl. P.S. Second update. Not today. Chapter 909. Talon City quickly returned to calm after a night of riots. However, compared to the past, this city had a slightly different atmosphere. The originally lazy guards were nowhere to be seen. Many of the nobles' mansions had been raided. There were many new faces on the streets and city walls. The city guards also had an obvious murderous aura. With the support of Mordor City, the half-elf noble Trano quickly gained a foothold in Talon City. This was a very smart half-elf. In order to prove his value to Mordor City, he was very straightforward and ruthless. He killed more than 30% of the nobles in Talon City. But this was nothing. After sitting on the throne of the city lord, he quickly condemned the other nobles, but they did not have to be exterminated. Instead, they had to take out a sum of money to atone for their sins. After the bloody lesson in front of them, the other nobles spent money to avoid disaster. Trano swept up millions of kindlers' wealth in one fell swoop, and more than 70% of it was sent to Mordor City. There was no doubt about it. Trano was a very smart guy. His actions quickly gained the support of the upper and lower classes of Mordor City. The officials of Mordor City even proposed to find a way to let him inherit the title of the Count. After a night of riots subsided. In the temple area of Talon City, there was a new temple to serve Soren, and in the central square of Mordor City, an area behind the original temple was also divided, and a new temple was built. This was the temple to serve the goddess of torture, Lorita. As Soren's subordinate god, within the range of the giant temple that Soren was building, there must be an empty temple for all his subordinate gods. Similarly, some of the followers of Lauvita, the goddess of torture, were also incorporated into the Inquisition and Adjudication Department of the Church of Sauron. Lauvita's followers were good at torture and interrogation. Such a god was very useful. A ruthless god would inevitably have a group of ruthless fanatics, and these people could help Sauron deal with many dark side things that could not be seen. According to the contract of the gods. As Soren's subordinate god, Lorita had the right to accept believers within the scope of Soren's faith, but including her church and herself, they had to listen to Soren's orders when necessary. At the same time, when Soren's church held a large-scale ceremony, Lorita also had the right to share the faith. That was to say, such a ceremony must also worship her, but the standard was far lower than Soren's. Similarly, if Lorita, the goddess of torture, wanted to hold a ceremony, then Soren's position must be in it. Her believers must pay respect to Soren before praying. Talon City was still the core area where the goddess of torture's faith spread. However, the scope of the two gods' faith had merged. This was the embryonic form of a divine system. In the future, as the divine system expanded, there would be many things to add, including large-scale rituals for the entire divine system. There was no doubt. After killing the goddess of poison and subduing the goddess of torture, Soren was recognized by the gods as a member of the Dark Pantheon. The original Dark Pantheon was the three gods of death. Soren was now a new member of the three gods of death in the eyes of the gods. But unlike the three gods of death in the past, after killing the goddess of poison, the first thing that Soren received was the congratulations and gifts from the goddess of agriculture. This was surprising. After Soren killed the goddess of poison, the Church of the Goddess of Agriculture actually sent a generous gift to Mordor City. A new batch of improved seeds, including wheat, barley, potatoes, corn, and other crops, and a new irrigation method recently developed by the Church of Agriculture. This was a well-known point. The goddess of earth hated the goddess of poison, and the goddess of agriculture also hated the goddess of poison. On the day that the goddess of poison, Talona, came to the mortal world, she spread a terrible plague. Not only did it kill many living creatures, but even a large forest was destroyed because of the plague. The goddess of poison had many enemies. Although Soren was a god of the evil alignment, after killing Talona, he seemed to have gained a lot of goodwill. However, it was also because he subdued the goddess of torture, Lauvita, that Soren was officially regarded as one of the Dark Pantheon. Many gods of the good alignment were very wary of him. Talon City returned to peace in just 3 days. With the influence of Mordor City on the city, many changes soon took place here. The most obvious one was the salted fish. This was not a joke. In just a few days, Talon City became the largest salted fish market in the central region of the continent. Because of the Avatar crisis, the food and materials in the entire continent became tense. After Mordor City secretly gained control of Talon City, the first thing that the officials in the city hall thought of was to use this place to dump the salted fish that Mordor City pushed into a mountain. The fish in Mordor City was incredibly rich. To exaggerate, the price of vegetables in Mordor City was about twice that of salted fish. One could imagine how much salted fish had accumulated in Mordor City. The dumping of materials quickly affected Talon City. Expensive fish were not very popular. Tuna, sturgeon, eels, and so on were mainly sold in other areas. Mordor City, near Talon City, was dumping salted sharks and whales. The weight of these large fish was very amazing because salt was not a problem in the coastal areas. The salted fish sold in Mordor City was only about 1.5 times the price of food. It was almost sold according to the price of salt in the past. This caused the lower class poor to rush to buy it from the beginning. Almost all the civilians in Talon City did not have to worry about not having salt and fish to eat in the next year. The cunning businessmen also quickly realized the business opportunity. They bought salted fish from Talon City and then dumped it in other places. This was actually equivalent to selling salt. The alchemy technology of Mordor City had allowed the production of salt to increase sharply. In order to exchange it for wealth as soon as possible, Soren almost sold and gave away the rich fish. In the mainland, most of the salt was produced by salt mines. Soren's plan was to use this as a source of wealth and consume the mountains of fish. There was no other way. There were too many fish in the outer islands. It was too easy to hunt a few whales and sharks near Mordor Island. This kind of half-selling and half-giving trade quickly increased the reputation of Mordor City in Talon City. After the civilians here had a lot of influence on Mordor City, Soren immediately began the next part of his plan. That was the population. Civilians, craftsmen, farmers, and so on. Mordor City needed a large number of foreign people to build. The Avatar crisis caused a shortage of materials, and many refugees had been displaced. What Mordor City needed to do now was to absorb people from them, and then transport these people to the port of Mordor through airships, and send them to the 12 rapidly expanding towns. According to Soren's calculations, if he wanted to fill these 12 large towns, according to the population of each large town of about 10,000, Soren currently had a gap of at least 80,000 people. P.S. There is one more update. Chapter 9:10. Population was wealth, population was an army, population was faith, and population was the foundation. For a long time, Soren's influence had been limited to the coastal areas. Even in the Wind Spear Hills, he could only influence the territory controlled by Adele Isabella. But this time, after opening the gap in Talon City, Soren had reached into the inner areas of the continent. Many civilians who were affected by the first and second waves of the Avatar crisis were mainly humans. Many farmers, craftsmen, and merchants were attracted by Soren and moved to Mordor City. At present, the structure of Mordor City was clearly divided. The half-elves dominated the population in the city, while the other places were quickly filled by humans. It was easy for the half-elves to cultivate skilled craftsmen, and humans were the best at farming. Soren's expansion plan was gradually perfected because of the absorption of a large number of humans. These human farmers could quickly reclaim the land. Mordor City ushered in the third population expansion. According to the calculation of the officials in the city hall, after the completion of the entire population migration process, the total population of Mordor City would reach about 300,000. With the current level of civilization in the material plane, the largest city only had a population of 100,000. Mordor City could accommodate so many people because of Sauron's epic-making plan. Otherwise, the entire city would become dirty and messy because of the excessive density of the population. According to the calculations of the witches, after the completion of the third phase of the plan, the upper limit of the population that Mordor City could accommodate was about 1 million. This was equivalent to the entire population of a small duchy. Traces of demons began to become more and more common. The third wave of the Avatar crisis officially came after a short period of preparation. At first, only the dwarves were attacked, but now even humans, elves, and orcs were attacked by the demons. The most severely damaged race was the elves. As the most powerful race in the material plane, the elves were far more popular in magic and professions than other intelligent creatures. The attack of the demons did not cause huge casualties to the elves, but the cunning demons naturally had other ways. They started a fire near the forest where the elves lived, and the fire spread for hundreds of kilometers. Many demons were immune to fire damage, and when they burned the forest, it naturally greatly affected the elves living in the forest. Even the misty forest was attacked by the demon army. However, because of Sauron, the original timeline had changed. In the process of attacking the misty forest, the Devil Legion was instantly taught a lesson by a group of ancient tree guardians. Sauron had saved this forest. With a large group of quasi-legendary tier dryads, the awakened oak guardians and ancient war trees were enough to fight against the Devil's army that had participated in the Blood War. The plan to plunder and kill the Treants and turn them into lustful demons failed. The demon army had given up on the Misty Forest during the third wave of attacks. The Misty Forest, which was supposed to have turned into a sea of fire during the second wave of attacks, had survived until now and had become one of the top forces in the material plane. It was just that this force didn't have good relations with any race and was relatively isolated. The only one who maintained close contact with them was Sauron. However, recently, a group of Droll had joined the Misty Forest. It seemed that they had sensed the power of the Father of the Oak. As mentioned before, there were internal divisions among the Droll. The human Droll was better, but the elven Droll had split into the Earth sect and the Ancient Tree sect. Many of the Ancient Tree sect's Droll had gone to the Misty Forest. It seemed that they believed that there was a chance to resurrect the Father of the Oak. Currently, according to the information that Sauron had gathered, there were hundreds of Droll living near the Misty Forest. It was almost the size of a small town. Among them, there were hundreds of high-grade Droll, including the core of the Droll sect, the Grand Droll. At the same time, because of the strengthening of the chaotic storm of the Avatar crisis, the tree shepherds near the eastern desert were also moving to the Misty Forest. The tree shepherds had always been followers of the Father of the Oak. After the fall of the Father of the Oak, they inherited the will of the Father of the Oak, and had been grazing the forest to improve the environment of the world. Now many tree shepherds were going to the Misty Forest. Sauron estimated that in the fourth wave of the Avatar crisis, the number of Droll in the Misty Forest might reach thousands. In other words, the Misty Forest would form an unprecedentedly powerful Droll sect because of the power of the Father of the Oak that Sauron had awakened. The third wave of the Avatar crisis was getting more and more intense. Compared to the reckless demons of the Abyss, the demons were much more difficult to deal with. Because there had been many fallen followers of the demons on the continent, and there were even human sects that believed in the Archduke of the Devil. Even the city of Mordor could not avoid this because the city of Mordor had recently caught a fallen follower of the Devil Lord, Mammon. This human fallen follower had been completely corrupted by the demons. The evil demons had infiltrated many races from the inside, and the most complicated human beings were obviously the easiest to break through. The Devil follower was handed over by Sauron to the followers of the goddess of torture, Lorita. Under the extreme torture that was cruel and almost artistic, the Devil follower told everything he knew. The situation was not optimistic. The devil follower came from the coastal areas. At present, the devil lords who had infiltrated the human world and controlled many followers were Mammon and the Queen of Yuma. The former had infiltrated the vicinity of Port Tylon, while the latter had great power in the Principality of Rossard. In the end, the fallen follower was secretly executed. And Soren also gave a special task to the Church of the Goddess of Torture, Lorita. He had some secret plans that needed to be carried out, and at this time, he needed the followers of Lorita because there were many special talents among the followers of the Goddess of Torture. Night fell. After dealing with a lot of things, Soren began to learn legendary spells. As a new god, he still needed to learn a lot because he also had the ability of a wizard. There was a soft sound of footsteps. When Soren looked up, fallen witch, Corinne appeared in front of him. The other party was wearing a black robe, which seemed to be empty because the contours of her body were exposed. I seem to be in a little trouble. Fallen witch's voice seemed to be a little hesitant, but more of it was a kind of panic. After seeing Soren's puzzled expression, Corinne slowly took off her robe. She only wore a gauzy silk dress underneath. With the faint light, the fallen witch's alluring body emerged in front of Soren's eyes. But at this moment, the two people's attention was not on it, because Soren saw strange dark tattoos on the fallen witch's white and smooth skin. These tattoos spread from her lower abdomen to her collarbone, and a faint scarlet color appeared in her pupils. It looked like a succubus. Chapter 9-11. The Phenomenon of Corruption. This was the first thought that popped into Soren's mind when he saw the tattoo on the fallen witch's body. The tattoo on the fallen witch's body was a bit similar to the magic patterns on the demon's body, but what Soren didn't understand was that if it was a demonic phenomenon, the fallen witch's body should have a very strong demonic aura. But in fact, it was the opposite. There was no demonic aura on the fallen witch's body, and even the slight demonic aura caused by the phenomenon in the past had disappeared. If there was a change on the fallen witch's body, then there was no doubt that the human aura on her body had gradually turned into the aura of a creature from the lower planes. It was a very rare phenomenon of corruption. The fallen witch was obviously a little uneasy about the changes on her body. She looked at Soren and said, "Is it because we didn't hold a ceremony to please the succubus queen? Under normal circumstances, we should have held a ceremony to please the succubus queen last month." Soren frowned slightly and said slowly, "Logically speaking, it shouldn't be like this. It's a very special time now, and even the succubus queen doesn't have the time to pay attention to you. It might be related to what happened in Talon City. If I'm not mistaken, you already have a trace of divinity on your body. Divinity from the evil god." Hearing Soren's words, the fallen witch couldn't help but be startled. She then asked nervously, "Then what should we do next?" Divinity from the evil god. There was only one evil god that died in Talon City, and that was the goddess of poison, Talona. The fallen witch knew what she looked like. As the most beautiful witch in the north, she didn't want to become like the goddess of poison. No matter how powerful a woman was, she still cared about her beauty, even if the fallen witch wore a long robe and a cloak all year round. "Don't worry." Soren smiled and said, "The goddess of poison became like that because she couldn't control the power of the divine title, so she was corrupted by the divine title of disease. You have very little divinity on you. He shouldn't have become like that. However, based on the current situation, it's best for you to find a way to become a demigod. This way, you can rely on your own strength to suppress the change. For now. If you need, I can help you suppress the effects of the corruption with my divine power. But, this change is only temporary. In essence, you will gradually become like me, but the key is whether you can control it or not." Just like Soren. That was naturally what the evil god looked like. Although Soren was still in the form of a half-elf, he was essentially an evil god from the lower planes. This depended on whether or not he could control his power. For example, the slaughterer form mentioned earlier. A real slaughterer was a twisted creature that was close to an alien. If Soren couldn't control himself, then his early transformation would be close to an alien. After becoming a god, he would become very similar to some evil gods, or even be corrupted by the divine title like the goddess of poison. However, Soren relied on his own power to control everything, so his body didn't change much. This was the difference between controlling power and being controlled by power. Princess Royal's ability often went berserk because she couldn't control her power, and Fallen Witch's corruption was because she couldn't control her power. So, everything is because of what happened in Telone City? Not because of the contract with the Queen of Succubus? Does that mean I don't have to hold a ceremony to please her? Fallen Witch asked after hearing this. Soren hesitated for a moment and said, I'm not sure about that. The tattoo on your body is a demon's tattoo. Under normal circumstances, corruption shouldn't cause such things to appear. The current possibility is that the goddess of poison's divinity triggered the mark that the goddess of succubus left on your body, so it stimulated your body and led to a more obvious demonization. If you can't control this, you may transform into a succubus in the future. There was no doubt about it. The Queen of Succubus gave Fallen Witch power in the beginning for her soul. In other words, after Fallen Witch died, or when the time was right, she could directly transform into a succubus. Souls could be transformed into succubus. A living person could also be transformed into a succubus. For a god, it wasn't difficult to change the form of a mortal, so Soren suspected that the Queen of Succubus had left a seed in the Fallen Witch to transform into a succubus. When Fallen Witch heard this, she couldn't help but hesitate for a moment and then said, if that's the case, how about we hold a ceremony to please the Queen of Succubus? The current state makes me very uneasy. When Soren heard this, he thought for a moment and then said, okay. Let's see if it works first. The Fallen Witch nodded and closed the door with a wave of her hand. Then, she cast a soundproof enchantment, and finally sealed the entire room. After doing all this, Fallen Witch couldn't help but take a deep breath and then took off the silk dress on her body with slight embarrassment. This is just a ceremony to please the Queen of Succubus. It's just to stop my body from decaying. She kept comforting herself in her mind. Fallen Witch covered her chest with her hands, then turned around with a blush on her face. Her back was facing Soren, and her round and full buttocks were exposed. Next, they needed to hold a special ceremony. When Fallen Witch came out of Soren's study, her face was slightly red, but her expression was very relaxed. There was a faint sense of laziness. At this time, from her collarbone to her neck, the original tattoo had disappeared. It seemed that her judgment was not wrong. This matter was indeed related to the mark left by the Queen of Succubus. Because after the ceremony to please the Succubus Queen, the tattoo on her body gradually faded, and no trace could be found on her white skin. The Queen of Succubus left some kind of seed in her body. Before she could erase this seed, she could only use this method to delay her own change, although this matter made her feel a little sorry for her daughter. On the other side, after the ceremony, Soren sat at his desk and pondered, why did such a change happen? What did the Queen of Succubus leave on Karina's body? That strange change was not caused by the Queen of Succubus's mark, so what was the reason? No matter what, the Fallen Witch was very important to Soren. She was not only Gloria's mother, but also an important pillar of Mordor City. In the future, the construction of the floating space city and the research of elemental fission would be inseparable from her. Soren would never allow the Queen of Succubus to do anything too excessive to her, so he must find a way to remove the mark on the Fallen Witch. A god may not be able to remove the mark left by another god. Soren had only two ways to solve this matter at present. One was to find the Queen of Succubus, negotiate with her, and pay a certain price for her to remove the mark herself. The second was that Soren promoted himself to a great divine power and directly removed the mark on the Fallen Witch's soul with the power of a great divine power. A great divine power was a special benchmark. Because in general, a great divine power was equivalent to the main god of a divine system. Although the Queen of Succubus was very powerful, she was only a weak god after all. It was possible to forcibly remove the mark with the power of a great divine power. The first way was more difficult because Soren had never dealt with the Queen of Succubus, and he didn't know where she was. As for the second way, he could try because Soren would be promoted to a great divine power sooner or later. His divinity had now reached 275 points, and it was not difficult to promote to a great divinity. Whether it was the body of the demon Orbis in the bottomless abyss or the body of the ancient god floating in the astral world, it was enough for Soren to increase his divinity to more than 300 points. The only problem was the divinity. Soren's divinity was only 140 points, which was a big gap. It would take him hundreds or thousands of years to increase his divinity by conventional means, so he could only plunder from other gods. It was now the time of the Avatar crisis. It was the worst and the best time. If he could kill a great divine power or finish the last blow, Soren might be able to make up for this huge gap in divinity. However, the fall of a great divine power was in the last stage of the Avatar crisis. At the current intensity of the third wave of impact, at most 1 or 2 gods with weak and intermediate divine powers would die. The key was in the fourth and fifth waves of impact. The fourth wave of impact was an elemental riot. At this time, the 4 elemental ancient gods began to appear one after another. Then the fifth wave of impact had the largest range, because many people had died in front of it. So when the undead kings began to act, the resurrected undead would form a very terrible scale, and this time, many liches who had been hiding from the world for hundreds or thousands of years also came out. At this time, even mid-level gods could fall if they were not careful. As for the last wave of impact, there was nothing to talk about, because this time the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, also came out in person. The devil's third wave of impact was to prepare for the fifth wave of impact. From the outbreak until now, some low-level creatures had died. At present, no other gods had fallen, but because of the spread of the plague, many places had become uninhabited areas. It wouldn't be long before the undead kings took action. Soren thought about all this silently. He had buried a lot of plans, but he still needed the right time to start them. Da. Just as Soren was lost in thought, there was a rush of footsteps outside the door, followed by a high-grade rogue who rushed in and said in a hurry, "My lord. Not good. Our fleet near the Amazon Sea was wiped out. No survivors have been found so far." Soren suddenly opened his eyes when he heard this, and then his expression became dignified. Chapter 9:12. It was a sudden accident. Looking at the entire material plane, Mordor's navy was the most powerful. Especially after Mordor had airships, the advantage of naval warfare was even more obvious. At present, there was almost no fleet that could compete with Mordor. Soren's navy had firmly grasped the South Sea, West Sea, and North Sea in his hands. But the news he received today was really unbelievable. A fleet under Soren's command, consisting of 3 32-gun warships, 2 frigates, and 2 medium-sized ships, was wiped out during a routine patrol. Such an armed force was enough to attack the port of a coastal city. It was almost impossible to make them disappear quietly, unless there was a mortal who did it. Not a single survivor? Soren's face was pale. "Have you searched the nearby sea and land?" The lurker bowed and said carefully, "We have searched. Not a single survivor was found." Could it be the Storm Lord? Soren thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, "Could it be the Amazons? Have they done anything unusual recently?" The lurker thought for a moment and whispered, "It shouldn't be them. Recently, the Amazon region has not been very peaceful. It is said that there is a wind element in the central part of the Amazon rainforest. And in the nearby sea, an Amazon fleet suddenly had an accident. Similarly, there was not a single survivor." What? Something happened in the Amazon? Soren suddenly looked puzzled, and then he seemed to remember something and murmured, "Did that thing run out?" No way. It happened nearly a year earlier. Thinking of this, he looked at the lurker in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Okay. I got it. You go and inform the high priest to come over." The lurker bowed and left. Soren immediately teleported to Gloria's laboratory. Fallen Witch had returned at this time. Her expression didn't seem to have changed, but her eyes flickered a little when she looked at Soren. What's wrong? Gloria was smart enough to tell that Soren had something on his mind. Soren reached out and caressed her face. Then, he kissed Gloria's forehead and said slowly, "There's a bit of trouble." After that, he recounted the whole story. "Do you want to see it for yourself?" Gloria's expression also became solemn when she heard this. She slowly said, "It's unlikely that a fleet can be wiped out silently. Even I would find it difficult to do so. Be careful if you want to go. Mordor City won't have any problems with me." As the hostess of Mordor City, Gloria was undoubtedly very competent. At least when Soren was not in Mordor City, she could always handle everything in an orderly manner. "Yeah." Soren nodded. At this moment, the High Priestess appeared. She bowed towards Soren and said, "My lord. Is there anything I can do for you?" Soren looked at the High Priestess in front of him and said slowly, "Yes. I have a message for you to send to the Sea Temple. It's best to hand it to the chief priest of the Sea Temple in person." The next thing was arranged. Soren set off for the Amazon rainforest. Although the Amazons were not far from Mordor City, fortunately, the two sides got along well. At least there was no battle so far. Of course. This also had a lot to do with the indigenous people as a buffer. The Amazon rainforest was a long and narrow continent. The Amazons were divided into several tribes, and there was also the existence of the Centaur race. Because of the chaotic nature of the Storm Lord, there was no unified regime in the Amazon rainforest. It had always been a scattered tribal system, which reduced a lot of pressure on Soren. The sea area where the accident happened was more than 200 kilometers east of Mordor City. It was a sea area that bordered the Amazon rainforest. A fleet was completely annihilated here. Thousands of soldiers in the city of Mordor were all killed. Except for some floating pieces of wood, no corpses had been found so far. This matter was simply too bizarre. As soon as Soren arrived at this sea area, he found a very obvious problem. There were very few sea creatures here. In other words, as an overseas area rich in natural resources, there weren't many schools of fish in this sea area, nor were there any other large fish. The entire sea surface was almost dead silent, and there didn't seem to be many living creatures. Soren's heart skipped a beat. He seemed to have thought of something that was not very good. Even a god would have a headache. Soren's figure gradually descended to the surface of the sea. He waved his hand to separate the sea water and then entered the dark bottom of the sea. There was a trace of disgusting smell mixed in the seawater. This kind of smell could not be detected by mortals at all, but it was so obvious to the gods. It was as if there was a natural repulsion. Soren's expression became more and more dignified. As he gradually entered the deep sea, he could feel more and more things. Chasing this smell, Soren soon found something in the depths of the sea. It was a huge footprint. This footprint was nearly 15 meters in diameter. It did not look like the footprint of a human species, but a bit like the footprint of a dinosaur. After seeing this huge footprint, Soren's face finally changed. He could not help but take a deep breath and murmured, "I can't believe it actually came out." Abomination. A name that even the gods would have a headache when they heard it. The birth of the abomination was a mistake. It was a product of divine power that should not have existed and was not foreseen. As souls that died prematurely, the abominations continue to live, absorbing nutrients from their power and pure hatred for their ancestors and all natural products. The abominations included countless types, all of which were unimaginable to mortals. They were cursed by heaven and hell, and the abominations had been sealed for countless years. However, with the passage of time, the abominations would sometimes be accidentally released or break free of their cages. The appearance of an abomination could cause great panic in a country, a world, or even a plane. Fortunately, most of the abominations had been sealed away by stronger gods. The abominations had the power of divinity because unless they were destroyed, they were immortal. The abominations had an evil love for disasters. They wanted to destroy everything and project their pain on a larger scale into the multiverse. Life, death, and extinction were the goals of most of the abominations. Although the abominations did not need food, they could get satisfaction from devouring, especially living things. Soren finally understood why a fleet would suddenly be annihilated without any survivors. If the abomination had really escaped, then it would be very strange if there were any survivors under such circumstances. The abomination's greed and desire for destruction could never be satisfied. They were tortured by pain and could only be temporarily satisfied when they devoured living things. An abomination had appeared. This was a disaster more terrible than the demons attacking the material plane. At least demons could be killed and expelled, but if an abomination was allowed to grow stronger, then even the gods would not be so easy to deal with. Because the abomination was very difficult to kill. And if it was only sealed, sooner or later, the abomination would run out again because they were immortal. A dinosaur? Soren silently looked at the footprints in front of him, and then activated his clergy power. Tracking, clergy. Death, clergy. With the vibration of the divine power, there was a special force in the whole sea, and then a broken and short picture appeared in front of Soren's eyes. It was a huge deep-sea monster that looked a bit like a dinosaur, but more accurately, it was like a Godzilla. Soren's face suddenly became very, very ugly. Because he knew this abomination, it could even be said that it was the biggest hidden danger and threat in the material plane. The abomination of the father of dinosaurs. The dinosaur god, Yutao, was one of the most powerful gods in the nature god system. He was a nature god left behind from the age of eons. He was an ancient god born during the age of dinosaurs, and he had disappeared with time. He might have fallen, or he might have fallen into a deep sleep. But he still left something behind. That was his offspring, a product of accident and mistake, an abomination bred by a great divine power. It was sealed in the depths of the most barren land in the west of the Outer Islands, a barren land where many mutant dinosaurs still lived. It was a terrible monster that was controlled by the desire for destruction, and if it was not sealed and destroyed, it would eventually devour the entire material plane. Who the hell released it? Damn it. Soren's face was very ugly because if this horrible abomination grew up, not to mention the sea, even the city of Moder, the Amazon rainforest, and the entire Outer Islands would be destroyed by it. An abomination left by a great divine power. This was no longer trouble, but a terrible disaster. Soren's figure instantly returned to the city of Moder, and then the light on the great temple gathered, and Soren's figure turned into a tall golden figure. Divine form. A huge amount of divine power gathered, and Soren's figure turned into a golden giant of hundreds of meters high. Then he raised his hand in the direction of Port Tylon, and a golden light flew across the sky. Then in the direction of the City of Wealth, another golden light beam containing the message of the gods passed by. Then in the direction of the Amazon rainforest, Soren hesitated for a moment, and then he also conveyed a message to the evil and terrible Storm Lord. It seemed that he was still a little worried. After thinking for a while, Soren pointed to the City of Glory. The meeting of the gods. This was the first time that Soren had summoned other gods in the form of a god. According to the ancient agreement in the Pantheon, this kind of summoning could only be used when there was a major disaster in the multiverse, or when there was something that could threaten the gods. Chapter 9:13. If it wasn't for the abomination. If it wasn't for the fact that this abomination was the son of the great divine power dinosaur god, Yutao. Sauron would never launch a meeting of the gods to invite so many gods, let alone a god like the god of light who was on the opposite side of him. But now it was the time of the Avatar crisis. The power of all the gods had been greatly reduced. Soren could seal or even kill an ordinary abomination alone in the form of a god. But now he was at most in the form of a saint. It was very difficult to kill the abomination left by the dinosaur god. With Soren's power now, he could at most try his best to kill the abomination left by a low-level god. The gods that he invited were basically all related to this matter. The abomination appeared in the overseas area, and the first to bear the brunt of it were Soren and the Storm Lord. If they left it alone, the ships of Motor City and the tropical Amazon would be very dangerous in the future. If the abomination entered the land, it could destroy Motor City in one day, and turn the entire tropical Amazon into ruins in a few days. Therefore, Soren and the Storm Lord couldn't just sit by and do nothing. Then there was the sea goddess. At present, the abomination was active in the area under the sea. It seemed that it still had some wisdom and knew to use sea creatures to make up for the loss of power after being sealed for a long time. If the abomination continued to grow, the sea would be seriously damaged because the abomination's desire to destroy was endless. They were crazier than the demons. If the sea goddess didn't do anything, the shark men, the dark scale fish men, and all the races in the sea who believed in her would be killed in minutes. As for the Lady of Wealth, there was nothing to say. As long as the abomination was not destroyed, the maritime trade of Motor City must be stopped. A fleet was completely destroyed, and thousands of soldiers of Motor City were all killed. Even Soren couldn't bear such a loss. Ordinary merchant ships and frigates were basically sent to their deaths when encountering the abomination. In this case, all the routes in the nearby sea must be stopped, and the trade of the Lady of Wealth naturally couldn't continue. If the scale of the disaster continued to expand, the entire overseas trade would be paralyzed. Finally, the God of Light needed no further explanation. The God of Light had always regarded protecting the world as his mission. Even if he wasn't very friendly to Soren, who was from the evil camp, he should still be aware of the terrible disaster that a God of Light could cause if he were to wreak havoc. However, Soren had always been curious about one thing. Who was the one who released the abomination? No matter who it was. This guy must be hoping for great chaos to occur in the material plane. After sending out the message of the meeting of the gods, Soren's golden giant also slowly disappeared. This movement alarmed many people, and many intelligence personnel who were secretly paying attention to Mordor City also reported this abnormality. Very soon, Soren received the first response from the gods. The message he sent out contained a trace of the power of the clergy of tracking, and the last trace of the tracking image was also sent to the other gods. The Sea Temple was the first to react. With a golden light, a golden figure immediately appeared above the Sea Temple. Many believers who served the Sea Goddess knelt down, and the avatar of the Sea Goddess also appeared above the temple. She held a trident and nodded slightly to Soren. It seemed that the goddess had realized the seriousness of the matter, and soon her avatar came to Mordor City. The second to respond to Soren was the Goddess of Wealth. Her avatar was not covered by the golden light, which meant that it was just an ordinary avatar of a god, unlike the avatar of the Sea Goddess, which retained at least 70% of the power of the original body. This meant that she was not very willing to contribute, and she just casually sent an avatar to respond to Soren's call. The growth of the abomination was very fast. After the arrival of the two goddesses, Soren immediately teleported to the vicinity of the strait. At this time, the whole world suddenly changed. Dark clouds suddenly appeared, accompanied by gusts of wind and rolling thunder. A blind giant appeared in the clouds. The storm god, Talos. Talos was a cruel, impatient, and irritable god. He was extremely addicted to chaos and destruction. The storm god was a powerful bully who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. He often flew into a rage, and his demands for believers had never weakened or stopped. The new god of shadow. Are you the one who summoned me? I hope everything you said is true, or you will pay the price. The temper of the storm god was as unpredictable as his priesthood. He was a member of the furious gods. As a great god with great divine power, he had very few opponents in the material plane. So this time, Talos came in his original body. He stood directly on the clouds with lightning in his hand, looking down at Soren, the sea goddess, and the goddess of wealth. He said in a deep voice, "Where is the abomination? This kind of sinful thing should not be left in the world." Even the storm god, who was chaotic and evil, clearly understood that he could not allow the abomination to move freely in the material plane. Although the god of storms was cruel to his followers, the god of storms knew that he really needed these followers. The Amazon tropical forest was the main place where his followers spread. If the abomination of gods was not eliminated, the Amazon tropical forest would soon be destroyed. Golden light appeared. With the dazzling light, the dark clouds in the sky dissipated, and a shadow covered in holy light appeared. It was like the purest holy light in the depths of mountain paradise. The god of light. At present, he was the most powerful master god among all the god systems. He was also the one who was closest to becoming a great divine power. He did not come in his original body. But even if it was just an incarnation, it was enough to disperse the storm and release a strong aura similar to that of the storm god. There was once a god who was above the great divine power like him, and that was Sirik, who gathered the power of the three gods of death. However, after combining the power of heaven and the power of the light of dawn into the power of the sun god, the god of light was probably a little stronger than Sirik. The arrival of the god of light restrained the anger of the storm god. Although one was lawful and good, and the other was chaotic and evil, the two great gods would not fight as soon as they met. This was because there was also a meeting between the gods in the Pantheon Temple. Many god systems maintained the balance, and the evil god's throne was also kept in the Pantheon Temple. Loshanda. Although the storm god restrained his anger, he was still very angry when he saw the god of light's expression. He was a powerful god who was born in the first battle between the Lady of Night and the Lady of Silver Moon. He was not afraid of Loshanda, but he did not provoke him recklessly. The god of light did not seem to care much about this chaotic and evil god. He just looked at Soren calmly, and then slowly said, "I feel the aura of destruction. It's the son of the dinosaur god, Yudahir. Don't waste time. Such a god shouldn't exist in this world." The dazzling light appeared, and Soren, who had the priesthood of shadow, suddenly felt that the god of light was very disgusting, but he controlled his impulse because he knew that it was the disgust caused by the priesthoods of opposing priesthoods. Light and shadow. They were mutually exclusive in the first place. The power of the god of light was a little beyond Soren's imagination. It seemed that the avatar crisis did not weaken him too much. At least for now, everything he showed was similar to that of a real god. As the golden light spread, the shadow of mountain paradise appeared behind the god of light. Then the holy light dispelled the darkness and directly found the source of the aura of destruction from the deepest part of the sea. It was a huge and strange dinosaur that knew how to lurk and hide. Its back was full of sharp barbs, and there were terrible marks on its ferocious and horrible head. The aura of destruction and hatred was emitted from its body. The god of light hated all gods. The Lady of Ocean was the first to act. She waved the trident in her hand, and the sea water exposed the god of light hidden under the sea. The surrounding sea water dispersed, and an invisible force lifted it up and exposed it to the air. Monster full of sin. Turn into ashes under the thunder. The Storm Lord's hatred for the abomination was the same as his hatred for the god of light. His accumulated anger was instantly vented. Accompanied by a loud rumbling sound, the wind and clouds within dozens of kilometers of the entire sea area changed drastically. Streaks of golden lightning struck from the sky, like an endless torrent, directly enveloping the abomination completely. The power of a great divine power was so amazing. Talos, who was in charge of the priesthood of storm and destruction, easily summoned thousands of lightning and directly covered the god of light in thunder. Roar. A furious roar filled with hatred rang out. The dinosaur-like abomination stood at the bottom of the sea and took all the attacks head-on. Thousands of lightning bolts struck its body, and soon, its body was charred and riddled with holes. However, then, something unbelievable happened. Although the lightning summoned by the Storm Lord with all his strength hit its body full of holes, its body quickly recovered in an instant. This was no longer regeneration. It was simply a terrifying mutation. The flesh and blood of the god of light almost recovered in an explosive way. As soon as the Storm Lord finished the thousands of lightning strikes, the injuries on its body were almost healed. It was as if nothing had happened. Roar. The god of light roared with hatred. The god of light opened its mouth and spat out a beam of light full of decay and destruction toward the storm lord in the sky. Dragon's breath? Soren's face changed slightly, and the storm lord in the sky also dodged this attack. The god of light in front of him could spit out a special dragon's breath, which was similar to the dragon's breath. This meant that it had eaten at least a high-level dragon in the past, and this dragon had caused it to further mutate. Chapter 9:14. The cursed god's counterattack made the storm god even angrier. With a roar, the lightning he summoned turned golden, and his body turned into a storm giant. He waved his spear and pierced the cursed god. This was his artifact, Lightning Beam, a weapon made of thunder. The Storm Lord, a special legendary profession in the Amazon, was formed based on his ability. Without holding back, the storm god suddenly showed his powerful strength. The cursed god's regeneration speed was completely suppressed by the storm god's attack. When the storm god waved his artifact, the cursed god's flesh was almost completely evaporated. As a powerful god in charge of battle, the storm god's power was amazing. Finally, the cursed god's regeneration speed could no longer keep up. With the storm god's roar, he directly pierced the cursed god's brain with his lightning spear. The cursed god was dead. The storm god's last attack completely wiped out the cursed god's breath of life, and even half of its body was evaporated. The battle seemed to be over. Soren was just about to breathe a sigh of relief, but something that the other gods had never thought of happened. The abomination, which had been killed by the god of storms a moment ago, suddenly came back to life. Its broken body regenerated at an astonishing speed, and soon, it returned to its original appearance. Resurrection? Soren looked at the other gods in surprise and murmured, "It was dead just now." This time, it was the goddess of wealth who answered him. She said softly, "This cursed god seemed to have swallowed a lot of souls, and it did die just now. But it seems to have come back to life very quickly." The resurrection of the cursed god made the storm god hesitate. He had just used a lot of divine power, but after killing the cursed god, it came back to life. In the long history, this kind of cursed god was the most difficult to deal with. In the end, even the gods had no way to deal with it and could only barely seal it. This kind of cursed god that could come back to life was even more terrible than ancient evil creatures. Obviously, a cursed god left behind by a powerful god was not so easy to kill. As the storm god retreated, the god of light, who had been watching the battle, also moved. Purify. The god of light frowned as he stared at the resurrected abomination in front of him. He raised his hand and pointed at the abomination, causing a blinding holy light to fall from the sky. This light was lethal to evil, and even Soren felt threatened by it. The abomination's body dissipated in the holy light. It was as if the god of light had been disintegrated. The light emitted by the god of light had a shockingly high temperature, which vaporized much of the abomination's body. The abomination was instantly heavily injured. Soon after, his body became less and less, and in the end, his entire existence was wiped out. He should be dead now, right? Soren wasn't the only one who thought this way. The other two goddesses had similar thoughts as well. Although the Storm Lord had killed the abomination, he had not completely destroyed its physical body. However, the Lord of Glory had just disintegrated the other party's body. Under such circumstances, even an abomination would have had a hard time surviving. But everything was still beyond their expectations. When the god of light withdrew his divine power, the abomination, which had been completely destroyed, suddenly began to regenerate wildly. At first, it was just a mass of twisted flesh and blood, then it quickly became a hideous mass of flesh and finally returned to its original appearance. A mass of dead flesh and blood turned into a shell. Then, the abomination, which had been killed, came back to life again. The goddess of ocean also had a troubled expression at this moment. She said to the other gods, "This abomination seems to be very difficult to kill. We are not in our god kingdoms at the moment. Why don't we seal it first?" It was impossible to kill. No one knew how many times this abomination could be resurrected. If it could be resurrected continuously, then it would be impossible to kill it. In the end, they could only seal it. The god of light frowned and fell into deep thought. He seemed to be looking for a way to completely destroy this abomination, but he did not have many ideas. If he couldn't kill it, he was afraid that he could only seal it or banish it into the space-time turbulence of the astral world. However, if he did that, sooner or later, this abomination would run out one day. Just as the god of light was about to use his divine power to seal the abomination with the level 12 imprisonment spell. Note, only mid-level gods and above can use this spell. Soren suddenly said, "Wait a minute. Please kill it again. Let me try one last time." Hearing Soren's words, the other gods could not help but look at him in surprise. The god of light took a deep look at Soren, as if he had found something in him, and then nodded silently. The holy light appeared again. This time, the speed was much slower, as if to take care of Soren. Under the divine power of the god of light, the abomination was once again broken down and purified. It quickly entered a state of serious injury, and then it was close to death. Slaughter domain. Death domain. Just as the abomination was close to death, Soren's figure turned into a golden giant. He directly rushed towards the abomination in the form of a saint, and the god of light stopped attacking in an instant. Divine power shockwave. The power from slaughter and death shrouded the nearby space. The golden giant transformed by Soren directly waved his hand and hit the abomination as the last blow. Boom! The abomination turned into ashes under the divine power shockwave. The power of death and slaughter also crazily shrouded it. With a strange energy wave, suddenly the body of the abomination exploded. Countless dazzling lights sprinkled down. It was not an entity visible to the naked eye, but a substantial divine power and soul power. Many souls poured down like a torrent, and among them, thousands of souls rushed directly to Soren's position and gathered in the palm of the golden giant transformed by him. This was the fleet swallowed by the abomination. The warriors of Motor City, those souls who died in the mouth of the abomination, were trapped in the body of the abomination until it was killed. Are they really dead? The expression of the goddess of ocean was very surprised because at this moment, the scattered souls were the gods who were killed and swallowed by the abomination. There was also the scattered divine light, most of which rushed to Soren, while the rest fell on the gods. The god of light gathered the most souls. More than half of the souls automatically rushed to his position, and then these souls were purified in the moment when they approached the body of the god of light. They directly turned into white pure souls, and then disappeared in the shadow of mountain paradise behind him. The Storm Lord received the second most souls, among which there were many souls of the Amazon warriors. The Storm Lord directly held them in his palm and sent them into the kingdom of God. The third was Soren. There were about 3,000 or 4,000 souls gathered around him, and they were also held in his palm and sent into the kingdom of God. The goddess of ocean received slightly less souls, only about 1,000 souls, most of which were sea-intelligent creatures. Only the goddess of wealth received the least souls, at most 300 or 500 souls, but she did not contribute much. The power of slaughter? The successor of the three gods of death? When Soren completely killed the abomination with his last blow, the other gods could not help but look at him with complicated expressions. The three gods of death had always been the axis of the gods of the evil camp. Although they had disappeared for a long time, the divine power that Soren just used obviously came from the god of slaughter, Baal. No wonder he could kill the abomination and prevent it from continuously reviving. The power that each god mastered had its own strengths, just like the Storm Lord's combat ability, the god of light's origin of holy light, and Soren's power from the three gods of death. There were also things that other gods feared. That was, if you were killed by him, you would really die. With the divine light of the abomination's death sprinkling down, a row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. You've killed the abomination, descendant of the dinosaur god. Extracting the target's soul energy. You've received 1500,000 slaughter EXP. The target has divinity. Extracting the target's divinity. You've received 20 divinity. The target has Shingezi. Extracting the target's divinity. You've received 25 divinity. The power of the abomination was distributed to the gods. Because there were 2 gods with great divine powers, Soren did not receive much slaughter exp and divinity, especially the slaughter exp that he received. In the end, it all turned into souls that gathered around the gods. However, what surprised Soren was that the abomination actually gave Soren 25 divinity, which was almost more than the divinity that he received. This was extremely rare. Perhaps the power of the divinity really came from the dinosaur god, which was the key to the continuous revival of this abomination. The abomination was dead. The meeting of the gods had come to an end. Before the god of light left, he took a deep look at Soren and then disappeared into the sky. The Storm Lord had a brief conversation with the goddess of the ocean, and then returned to the tropical Amazon forest. The goddess of wealth was just there to share the spoils of war, so she left quickly after killing the abomination. Only the goddess of the ocean stayed for a while, and then said a few words to Soren. The meeting of the gods was temporary. Only when there was a serious threat to the existence of the gods, they could cooperate for a short time. Now that the abomination was dead, they naturally had to leave. Otherwise, Soren suspected that the god of light and the Storm Lord would fight on the spot. After all, one was lawful and good, and the other was chaotic and evil. Soren soon returned to the city of Moder. He was not in a hurry to convert the power he got from the abomination to upgrade his profession level. The most important thing now was to settle these souls. They could be converted into petitioners in Soren's holy kingdom. Thousands of people died in Moder, and 70% of the souls that Soren got were professionals. These excellent souls could give birth to the first batch of high-quality petitioners in Soren's holy kingdom. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.